all the people that have gone out there against the mainstream media and said, you're going to call us racist? You're going to call us potential Timothy McVeighs? Fuck you. War.
Quite sure he's right. Obsession neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
War.
This is the end game.
I mean, as long as you're reasonable. You have to be reasonable. We have to be reasonable. Thank you very much.
You don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do.
Chris, please explain to the normie we need to finish what we've started.
All right, everybody. It is Friday, July 11th, 2025, the 173rd day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. So I want to thank everybody for watching and sharing the show on Tuesday. That was a very positive reaction, and I always enjoy that. I think that people liked the opening monologue in particular, which ended up lasting for almost a half an hour. I kind of clipped that down, cleaned the whole thing up, and released that video this week, and audio actually as well. And called it Palate Cleanse. So I think that that's probably a good piece of content to share. I hope that it is. Today I want to pick up kind of with some of the same subjects and a bit of the same approach, maybe not quite so extended. But one of the things that we were talking about the other day was the intentional creation of cognitive dissonance through these stories that create a strong emotional response to people who are still engaged in the false reality in significant ways. There's not a real way to break them right out of that without the potential for destabilization. So we see a process that leads people through that waking up period. We talked about it as narrative disarmament in some important sense the other day. And I think that that's happening really often. And I wanted to, I was thinking about this phenomenon because I'm busy writing about a lot of the epistemology and having tried to wipe a worldview away completely and then, see what's left there. And I was trying to think today about what it would be like to find out in one moment, in an irrefutable way, that your entire world was not how you've known it. And I thought that, at least I'm not adopted, so I don't know what that feeling is. But I imagine that kids who are told that they're adopted for the first time, having never thought about even the possibility. And so I'm not talking about like white parents raising a black child or black parents raising an Asian child. I don't know if that's ever happened, but that would be funny. I'm sure it has happened. The odds are that it has happened. But just imagining how jarring it would be to one day find out that these people that you've spent your entire life believing are your parents are actually not your parents. They wanted to take care of a child, and thank goodness there are people out there like that. But your parents are someone entirely different, and you have no idea. Now, the only roots you have into the reality as you've always known it are pulled up. They're just yanked out, and you got to figure out how to plant them somewhere else because you're in a different reality. You just get shunted into this other universe that you didn't know existed. And I don't know if there's another instance of that. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it after I came to the adoption thing. You might be able to find more examples. I don't know if you could find one that's more jarring and immediately reversing of your understanding of reality than that one as a young person. Or I suppose it could probably be pretty jarring as an adult too. Imagine getting told that you were adopted at like 60 years old. That would be so strange. So anyway, I didn't keep going on about it. There's very few things in a person's life that are more significant to forming an understanding of reality and an understanding of who we are, I would imagine, than who your parents are, where you actually came from. Okay. So the destabilization would be immediate there. Now, we know people are able to recover from that sort of destabilization, but what if that happened 100 times at once when you were 60 and it overturned your understanding of the entire world at one time? Well, some of us have experienced that in, ways that are caused from outside us. We get that kind of emotional reaction. Something happens in our life to cause that response from us. And at that point, then maybe we're able to change our minds and see things in a way that we've never seen them before, which is a wonderful experience. Don't get me wrong. But if it all happens at once outside of your control, you didn't anticipate it coming, you didn't seek it out, you didn't ask for any of it, well, that's going to be pretty destabilizing. And I would think it would be on par with finding out you were adopted. What if you find out, not that you're adopted, but that all of your reality as you've ever come to know it is immediately reversed, just one side flipped over? Because I think that that's ultimately what we're talking about here. It's finding out you're adopted along 100 issues at a time, or 1,000, or the entirety of your knowledge. Everything you've ever thought about is different than how you've thought it. Okay. And I think that people are moving in that direction. I don't think it's going to be stopped in any case. Okay. Not anytime in the future, anytime in the near future, maybe a millennia from now. Maybe that sort of thing would reverse. But people are finding out that the reality was not as they knew it. And there are hesitations that people have. They'll be okay with it when it comes to a few subjects or many subjects or most subjects. And then there will be a few that they just can't let go of. It has to be this way. Otherwise, well, I don't know what the rest of it might be. And I'm sure we all have those. Nobody's fully awake, as I've said many times, certainly not me. I'm still in the relatively early stages of that process, at least in terms of time, and however awake I am, people can judge for themselves. But everyone is traveling in that direction. And I did the same thing the other day. It's so prevalent that it seems like everyone, yes, I understand that there are clear and obvious exceptions to this. There are some people who are digging themselves deeper into that false reality and just creating all the fortifications and barricades they can. Don't let any of those reality arrows ever pierce my shield and actually wound me. There are people who are very, very adamantly opposing any of that, just doubling down and tripling down till the end of days. And we don't expect them to turn back around at the point where they recognize that virtually everyone but them believes the other way. Well, then that's when people go crazy, and we might still see that point. And so we talked the other day about a couple of framings and ways to think of the sorts of things we're seeing right now. And I want to continue down that road as well, with the idea of, the level, the jarring nature of what we were undergoing, being present in mind. And I want to talk about something I think that Trump is doing and has done countless times over the last 10 years. But I think that we can see this in a number of the stories that I'm going to talk about today. It seems like he's playing both good cop and bad cop about virtually everything. He'll give us one side of the issue and then the other side. And he does it over and over again. And now we're seeing them presented at roughly the same time. Just good cop, bad cop. Here are both cops. I'm going to be Donald Trump. I'm going to play both cops. I'm going to make both sides of this argument. My supporters are going to support me. And then when I make the other side of the argument, they're going to support me there too. And they'll realize, hey, wait a second, only one of these can be right. People will gravitate toward the correct decision and determination. And once Trump supporters do that, then it starts bleeding into the culture broadly, because initially it becomes about attack Trump, defend Trump. Once Trump takes the other position, well, then you can attack or defend Trump from either viewpoint, and they cancel one another out. So it becomes no longer about Trump. It becomes only about the viewpoint, right? I hope that makes sense. I was going to say, does that make sense? But, there's going to be the delay on the chat. I'll be sitting around talking about holding for processing just to find out whether or not it makes sense. I'm going to assume that it makes sense. So he's created a promotion of his position and an opposition to his position. And then he steps back and lets those things go at it, having already portrayed good cop and bad cop. And we've talked about this in similar terms for many years, because this is kind of, in some sense, what the point of the reruns always was. These stories playing out in cyclical fashion. And, they've had some very good, very convincing versions of these stories over the years. But over time, once you begin to recognize the PSYOP effect, well, then you see the stories a little bit differently, because once the reality factor is gone, it's like, wait a second, they're trying to pull one over on us. Why are they trying to pull one over on us? Right? Then the question becomes, who exactly is trying to hoodwink us, and for what reason, and how cautious should we be about the people we think are on our side while we can see them hoodwinking us? And I would suggest being as skeptical and cautious as possible here. So Trump now, at the same time, forget the reruns, forget the cycles. We're going back and forth in the same week. And I'm not saying that there's not a coherent through line underneath all of that where Trump is consistent in his view. And I would argue there is that through line. But in terms of a public communication strategy and the effect of that communication strategy, I think that through line is not, it doesn't refute the point I'm making. It's just the way Trump operates on the reality level and on the narrative level at once, and those things are in alignment. We talk about how he is adhering to the original Constitution while also being fully engaged with our system of government as it's set up now, if not for any formal, legal, real effect, at least for the way it's communicated and portrayed to the people at large, because that's part of the game. All right. You can solve it on the real level. And if you don't solve it on the narrative level as well and get people to understand their new reality, well, then at some point you're just telling them they're adopted. Okay. And then the whole thing has the potential for collapsing. What if you are the person who's resistant to understanding that, hey, I was in the wrong paradigm. Okay. I'm not just a little wrong about a few things. I'm a lot wrong about a lot of things. In fact, I'm exactly wrong about a lot of things. I think the thing is the opposite of what it actually is. Therefore, I'm doing the opposite thing that I should be doing if my goals are what I believe them to be, right? If your goals are to be successful or to be moral or any of these things, in the inversion, you are operating in favor of those goals, believing that you are approaching those goals while you're actually making yourself farther from those goals. Okay, you're moving in the wrong direction. I just lost my voice for a second. You're moving in the wrong direction, and you don't realize it. Okay, that's the important part. A lot of people believe they're moving in the right direction. I mean, we all do to some extent, or we wouldn't be going in that direction. We don't believe it's time to turn off our path, and that can be true even when we're wrong about everything. Okay, and so people who don't want to just accept that right away on their own, understand they don't know anything, just humble themselves and move forward in a different way. Well, then, however many of those issues remain by the time the musical chairs, this is like, it is exactly like musical chairs. If you're the person who's trapped outside and all of those things, you haven't found a comfortable location yet, the game's over. You're going to go nuts. And so I think that that's the point of this particular narrative move. And I'll also say then that I think what we have here is an acceleration of the cognitive dissonance that creates that emotional response I was talking about the other day. When you begin to feel unmoored, like the world is not how you thought it was, people are going to respond in different ways, but that response is happening more and more often. And I would say that the pace of that happening is accelerating as well. All righty then. How are we doing over on Rumble? And checking in Substack. All right. People are just beginning to perk up in the chat. Okay. Let us continue with a bit of the old MAGA versus tech talk. This is Steve Bannon from earlier today over on Getter saying pimping for the oligarchs against MAGA. And what we have is an article from American Greatness that I'm about to pull up. And the main picture of that article is J.D. Vance, and it looks like he is coughing into his hand or maybe giving a fist pump, but it's not a very aggressive one there. It's not a strong look for a fist pump. So, or maybe he's speaking into an invisible microphone at the AI Action Summit, but it is a very strange picture on the on this article here that Bannon's sharing. Let's pull up the article. And I think that potentially the fact that JD is pictured here has some bearing on the Steve Bannon post. Is he claiming that JD Vance is pimping for the military industrial complex? That is, and on behalf of the oligarchs, I should say, that is entirely possible if you ask me, because he is inextricably tied to this movement. And so the article from American Greatness is by a man named Paul Steidler. MAGA country thriving from tech AI investments, but risks abound. Okay, so this is from just yesterday. Much has been made of the growing internal battles within the Trump administration between supporters of tech bros, such as Elon Musk, and those on the populist right who are slamming the tech industry like Steve Bannon. These divisions came to a head as the U.S. Senate considered a 10-year moratorium on state AI legislation as part of the massive budget reconciliation bill, siding with Team Bannon in opposing such a ban. These fights are particularly dangerous to the MAGA movement, and not just because they sow political division. MAGA country is well positioned is particularly well positioned to reap the benefits of America's golden age of AI, which will have a transformative and uplifting impact on all Americans who seize the opportunity. And isn't that interesting? The golden age of AI. I thought we were just in a golden age. Is the golden age some reference to AI? I mean, Trump can say it all he wants. Trump takes the branding of enemy projects and then reverses the branding on it all the time. Trump completes the reversion on so many things. That's what it means to be a master of branding. Okay. And Trump has one of the most valuable brands in the world. He knows what he's doing. Okay. You take the brand as it is defined and reverse that. Understanding, by the way, that it was already reversed by the regime in that cycle of infiltration and takeover and revision. And so it's just coming back to what its abstract form would be, its platonic form, you could call it, even though we're talking about concepts here and not the form of objects or whatever. But the thing in itself as perfected in its ideals. Okay. Maybe that's a good enough way to describe that. So the argument here is that Trump's supporters in these red states really, because it's not Trump's supporters, but it's red states, are going to benefit greatly from these tech investments, and therefore they are good for MAGA, and MAGA needs to realize that. Otherwise, it's potentially dangerous because the MAGA movement will be divided, and then we won't have any say whatsoever. We can't fight against the tech, or we will have no say whatsoever. That should be an understandable message from this side of the issue. Vice President J.D. Vance, the administration's leader on tech policy, understands this, and his intervention may be the only thing that can bridge the growing divide. What is J.D. Vance doing, having gone to Steve Bannon from Peter Thiel onto War Room to announce that he truly was MAGA, which is how he got elected in 2022, or so we're told, because of course the elections are fake. And we know that the midterms in 2022 were a disastrous and fraudulent election. I mean, they're fake elections. Okay. So JD made friends with MAGA, having been never Trump. And now he's supposed to take the tech side on these issues to protect MAGA from themselves. Well, that doesn't sound quite right. Why would JD be the representative of the tech community? Continuing. He also acknowledged the tension between techno-optimists and the popular right of Trump's coalition. The vice president said the idea that tech-forward people and the populists are somehow invariably going to come to loggerheads is wrong. And that might be correct, but the way that would probably come to be is by censoring the populist nationalist side in favor of the tech optimists on social media platforms until everybody understands that the tech optimists have won this battle. Except the tech optimists have not won any battles so far. Okay. Every time their position becomes the consensus wrong position. And again, you can think of the H-1B visa issue back over, I think that was like the Christmas to New Year's period. Trump came out and played good cop, bad cop on that issue. He says, oh, well, it's okay for H-1B visas, but also we don't want any illegal aliens. We might have to shut down immigration totally. We need to protect the American workers, both sides of the issue, right? Super protectionist. That is more of a trade term, but in terms of immigration, I think you can apply it there as well. And also super willing to make sure that these companies have all of the immigrant labor they could ever desire. So he takes both sides. The argument is had online. The tech bros lose the argument. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that they've lost the ability to hire H-1B visa workers. I'm not saying that the issue has concluded and the problem is solved. I'm just saying that the public conversation has gone in the direction away from the tech oligarchs, and it's not going to turn around and come back. Okay. There's not an argument that's going to convince Americans that we need more H-1B visa immigrant labor, right? So we can look at all the tech issues in a similar fashion and understand that every time this happens, because the narrative battles have already been won, it's just going to be the tech optimists, tech oligarchs, tech bros losing. All right. It's exactly the same as what we saw in 2022, 2023, and early 2024 with the rhinos and the rhino hunting and the fake primaries leading up to finally everyone coalescing around supporting Donald Trump. Or, then they go never Trump and join the Democrats, as we saw the neoconservatives do. They were cleaved off. Then the Republican establishment was cleaved off. The neocons are getting hit now from all sides so that everyone recognizes, oh, those are the neocons. We all hate those people. They're not American. Okay. So after that, what do we have left? Well, Democrats are gone. The neocons are gone. The rhino Republicans are gone. And now it's going to be the tech oligarchs. And so all of these, and now I'm not saying the Democrats were ever aligned with Trump, although he used to be a Democrat. So, whatever, but they used to like him. He wasn't hated by liberals anywhere. I don't think. I certainly had never experienced Trump hatred prior to Trump coming down the escalator. Okay. So, so the Democrats were never aligned, but rhinos, neocons, tech are all being cleaved off. All these groups had aligned with Trump, tried to convince Trump supporters, to convince MAGA that their interests were aligned so that they could use Trump and MAGA as a vehicle to complete their agenda. Okay. And of course, that's what the Great Reset was. Why would it have been anything else? Did we think it was only Democrats trying to Great Reset us? Now, again, Burning Bright talks about this. I talk about it in different terms, but he calls it the Good Reset. Okay. Which is basically just the hijacked Great Reset that he is more optimistic about than I am. I think I'm not quite the futurist that some are, because we're supposed to be good people. We're not supposed to make flying cars, which is not to say flying cars are bad. Okay. We can make flying cars, but that's not our purpose in this world, in whatever world we are in. Okay. So I think that process is going full steam right now. JD thinks that MAGA and populists, the tech segment of Republicans and the right, as they call themselves, even though they are on the left because they are statists. Okay. Especially the uniparty right podcast bro sphere, of which JD Vance is part. Give me a break. So they may not come to loggerheads because one of those sides of the conversation might be silenced completely. And to think that that's not where they're intending to go would be crazy. But hey, JD is getting their back. In other words, MAGA supporters, tech lovers, and innovators can get along, work, and thrive together, breaking down real and perceived barriers. That is, so long as the Musk and Bannon factions do not invariably fight. And he goes through some examples and how this is going to make financial sense. Data projects planned and up and running in Mississippi. Meta announces a $10 billion project in Northeast Louisiana. XAI is investing $12 billion in Memphis, Tennessee. There are other projects for about $50 billion in investments within a 50-mile radius of Mississippi, said Governor Tate Reeves of Mississippi. Okay. So all this money is flowing into red states. Is Trump responsible for all that money? Maybe, maybe not. I have a feeling that money would have been directed into those states regardless, because that's what the plan called for. Okay. Elon Musk actually, as he does with many things in the tech oligarchs, became a red stater long before any of this happened, right? What has he been in Austin for 4 or 5 years now? And then Joe Rogan went, all the podcast bros went. So Elon, again, was the early adopter of one of those things. And then he can carry the brand. And when that brand goes bad, well, there's no one better to kill it than Elon Musk. So all this money is coming into these red states. We are supposed to believe that because these red states elected, quote unquote, Trump in overwhelming fashion in a fake election last year, that if there is something good that happens in red states, it is then necessarily for the benefit of MAGA. And why would anyone believe that? That's not how it actually works. Okay. I've lived in California and Texas, and they're the same. All right. The people are a little different. Everything's branded a little differently, but they're both clearly under regime control. Okay. And so they're pursuing different sides or different angles of the same agenda. So tech money being pumped into California and tech money being pumped into Texas is a wash if you understand the Uniparty and the Uniparty's grip on control. So should MAGA think that these tech investments in things that MAGA doesn't even want in the first place, generally speaking, are we really supposed to pretend that this is good for us? Of course not. This is a sales pitch. And we'll finish it out here. For the record, though, tech companies do not make investment decisions of tens of billions of dollars based on the political ideology of a state. Well, no kidding. Roger Weiner, Economic Development Director for, I think that's Amazon Web Services, AWS, said we choose locations based on electricity availability, access to renewable power, redundant power, stability of the grid, proximity to an existing cluster of similar projects, and a welcoming community. The location process is always arduous and highly competitive. So they're not choosing based on whether or not MAGA is nice to them and whether they're in a red state or blue state based on the results of a fake election. Wow. This brings us back to the populist tech bashers. It is one thing to raise concerns about a company's or an industry's practices, but it is reckless to demonize them. Okay, I guess we'll just take your word for it. On June 2nd, Steve Bannon branded big tech the most dangerous thing in the country and has smeared tech leaders as evil, sociopaths, and narcissists. Many folks in the heart of MAGA country disagree, and it would do Mr. Bannon some good to visit and talk with them, as though Steve Bannon doesn't personally know Elon Musk and a countless number of these people. Steve Bannon is tied in with everybody. It's so crazy that people are like, oh, he's got a difference of opinion. And the problem is he doesn't know any of these people. He doesn't know what they really have going on and doesn't understand how good it'll be for his MAGA supporters. No, he understands. He understands. Why would you ever think he doesn't understand? Okay. So we're worried. We're supposed to be worried that all of this is going to divide MAGA. We cannot demonize the tech oligarchs or they're going to be mean to us like we are mean to them, even though the article also states that they don't make their decisions based on political ideology, which means they certainly don't care what our opinion is, okay? If we don't want them or not. If we want to urge Trump to reel it back when it comes to these AI and tech projects. I'm all for all these projects as drainage vehicles, and I think that's what they are. But then that would indicate they're probably going to get rug pulled at some point, because Trump isn't actually as tech positive as he has been portrayed because of his approach to this very issue. Okay. The tech and MAGA divide. The people are going to have to figure that out for themselves. Hence the cycles of reruns, hence the good cop, bad cop. Over time, you get both sides of the whole thing. And the people, having figured it out for themselves, will then allow Trump to move forward down the path he must go. Okay. And this pattern is present on every issue in the MAGA agenda. And we've watched this play out and take place over the last decade since Donald Trump came down that very famous escalator. Okay, let us continue. Where are we? Okay, let's take a moment. This is a couple of minutes long, and I'll stop it a few times, but I want to play the entire thing. This is Curtis Yarvin on a recent podcast. We talked in the last episode. Elon Musk had just followed Curtis Yarvin, spotlighted Curtis Yarvin, and I guess a few days later he unfollowed him. What does it mean? Hard to say. But here is Yarvin.
Oh, there's a great piece that I've sent to, some of the people that I know that are involved in the transition. There's all sorts of people milling around.
Name one.
There. Name one. Wow. Name one. Well, I definitely know Mark Andreessen, and so I sent this piece to Mark Andreessen. Like, I'm an outsider, man. I'm an intellectual, and the actual ways in which my ideas get into circulation is actually mostly through the staffers and the kind of younger people who basically kind of swim in this very online kind of soup. I'm on very safe ground, despite not knowing him well at all, that someone like J.D. Vance believes essentially in the common good. And the idea that government should serve the common good. And I think that people like JD and people in the sort of the broader intellectual scene around him, which is very varied intellectual scene, would all agree on that principle. Now, if that principle, I don't know what you mean by democracy in this context. What I do know is that if democracy is against the common good, it's bad. And if it's for the common good, it's good.
I think what you just described.
Let's pause right there for a second, actually. So the common good is what Curtis Yarvin believes all of this is for. And in some kind of poetic sense, perhaps it is. We should be working toward the common good, with whatever form of government we select. But when you are talking about the common good as the driving force, okay, well, that is a worldly goal based on subjective standards. Okay, it can't be anything other than that. And I was writing yesterday actually about the Sam Harris book. I've mentioned it a couple of times on this podcast before. It's called The Moral Landscape. And what that book does or attempts to do is create an objective morality based on science and what science has to say about the consequentialist and utilitarian calculations about whether or not a given act would increase or decrease suffering and flourishing in the world. Okay, so science is going to decide that. And once science has decided, well, then we have an objective moral truth because it was derived from our authoritative source. The science has spoken. Now we know what is morally good. Okay, the objective standard used to be what God commands, and the objective standard used to be what God commands. The objective standard in Sam Harris's revision and inversion is the authoritative source and what the science tells us. The science just does its process. All the science just throws it all into the hopper. And then the great cloud in the sky where the algorithm lives, Zeus throwing lightning bolts at us, that analyzes all the science and tells us what the new objective moral good is, okay? Except the science changes all the time, and it tells us that it changes all the time. And if that's the case, then the objective moral truth would be changing constantly. It could change 1,000 times. How can you have 1,000 different objective moral truths about the same question? Okay, that's not possible. So what it is moral relativism under the guise of an objective morality that then serves everyone. Okay, that's nonsensical. That's exactly what Curtis Yarvin is talking about. And it's worth noting that Curtis Yarvin went to Brown. He says he's the most right-wing person in any room he's in. I'm not even convinced he is right-wing. He just might be the most decentralization-oriented leftist, okay? His grandfather was Yarvin is a secular, Jewish, scientific materialist. His grandfather was a communist who Yarvin believes helped defeat the Nazis on behalf of the United States of America. Therefore, that commie is a hero. Okay. Now, Yarvin will tell you he's not a commie, which is fine. But what then is the common good? And who's determining the common good? And how are they going to see to it that the common good is realized across culture? Okay. So all of a sudden, the goals actually sound a lot like the regime's goals in the way they were always described from the left point of view rather than the right point of view. Okay. And so then what you see and should realize is that the mainstream opinion is being reversed. All right. And it's not, or I should say the mainstream perspective is being reversed. Okay. Now, instead of having everything approached from a center left, a uniparty left perspective, we're going to have everything approached from a uniparty right perspective. And they're going to sell that to the public. The public will believe that they've corrected course in their culture, and then they can just start the whole cycle over again. Again, that's the Great Reset. That's the regime plan. And to think that it would be anything other than that, I believe, is silly. Of course, they're going to take two approaches. They have two brands or more than two, but all of these brands of the same thing, they're going to be on offer. We'll see what people accept. We'll pit two of them against one another broadly. Everyone else will divide along those lines and find their true camp, right? There's people with different opinions in the Democrat Party, people with different opinions in the Republican Party. But at the end of the day, they're on one side or they're on the other side. And the various personal tastes and opinions about issues become totally irrelevant. What does Curtis Yarvin mean by the common good? Let's continue.
Might be something that Peter Thiel would agree with. And there was...
I think a progressive could agree with it.
And there was reporting that I saw in...
Injuries.
Oh, man.
Intellectual scene around.
I just ruined that. In terms of the place on the video for those listening. Peter Thiel could get down with that. And then Yarvin says, yeah, I believe a progressive could get down with it. Hey, guy, that's because Peter Thiel's a progressive. Okay. And that's why he hired you, though you think you're not a progressive. One of Yarvin's seminal writings, one of the things that you would read if you are first approaching Yarvin is his message to progressives. Let me see if I can actually find what exactly that is. I want to get the title correct. An open letter to open-minded progressives. Okay. And so you can hear Yarvin's takedown of progressivism there, although he sure aligns with progressives. Okay, let's keep going.
Where they published some emails, I think, between you and the right-wing provocateur, Milo Yiannopoulos, where you talked about watching the 2016 election with Peter Thiel and referred to him as fully enlightened. What would fully enlightened have meant in that context?
What fully enlightened for me generally means fully disenchanted. When I look at basically what the kinds of people that I know, not
What the kinds of, is he being played by Pauly Shore? This guy, man, he is redefining the word enlightened right now to mean someone who is disenchanted with what Yarvin calls the cathedral, which is kind of the centralized mouthpiece of the regime, academia, media, etc. I don't think Yarvin takes that far enough. I don't think he understands where the top of the regime is. I believe he thinks some of their centralization among a progressive ideology that has seized control of these institutions. I don't think he sees things as a top-down centralized control system worldwide that all operates together, and therefore a more accurate model for the cathedral, as Yarvin describes it, would encompass all of that. But he doesn't do that. Let's continue.
Not really that well in Silicon Valley think. I'm basically like, have people like this been exposed to my ideas? Yes. Do they agree that America should be a monarchy? I doubt it, but I have no idea. But what they agree on is not a belief, but a disbelief. So I think that when a person who lives their life within the kind of, sort of progressive bubble, liberal bubble, use whatever term you like, of, the current year, looks at the right or even the new right or whatever, you want to call it. I think what's hardest to see is that what's really shared is not a positive belief, but an absence of belief. Basically, we don't worship these same gods. We do not sort of see, the New York Times and Harvard as like divinely inspired in any sense, or we do not see their procedures as ones that sort of always lead to truth and wisdom. We do not think that the way the U.S. government works, really works well or seems to be perfect in any respect.
Again, it's one thing to understand that those outlets aren't perfect. They're not the word of God incarnate in a paper. That's not the same as understanding that both sides of the media are involved in pushing the same agenda. And again, I don't know how. I have to assume that he is covering for these ideas.
That the way the U.S. government works, really works well. Or
does anybody believe that the U.S. government works well? Okay. That means we're being told that we need to change our form of government and embrace a monarchy. And maybe it just is a monarchy. Maybe we're just under military rule. We probably always have been. And maybe that's the only way of the world. Okay. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But again, if you don't understand why the government doesn't work well, you've kind of missed the whole thing, right? It's not because the form of government couldn't work well. It's either because A, government is an illusion for the people in the first place, or B, we need to then switch the system rather than understand that the system has been infiltrated and inverted. Let's continue.
Seems to be perfect in any respect.
And this absence of belief is what you call enlightened.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's a disenchantment from like believing in these old systems. And the right thing that should replace that disenchantment is not, we need to go do things Curtis's way, and is basically just a greater openness of mind and a greater ability to look around and say, we just assume that our political science is superior to Aristotle's political science because our physics is superior to Aristotle's physics.
Your ideas are ones that have been pointed to by people in real positions of power in the Republican Party. I think it's probably overstated the extent to which you and JD Vance are friends, but he has
definitely overstated.
He has mentioned you by name publicly and referred to sort of de-wokeification ideas that sort of are very similar to yours. You've been on Michael Anton's podcast, and Michael Anton has been sort of tapped by Trump to be high up in the State Department, talking with him about how to install an American Caesar. Peter Thiel, a major Republican donor, has said, you're an interesting thinker. And so let's say people in actual positions of power said to you, Curtis, we're going to do the Curtis Yarvin thing. What are the steps that they would take to change American democracy into something like a monarchy?
My honest answer would have to be, it's not exactly time for that yet. Because what I see happening in DC right now, nobody should be watching this panicking, thinking I'm about to be installed as America's secret dictator. And I don't think I'm even going to the inauguration. Were
you invited?
No.
Gosh, man, it's not time for his plan yet. It's got to happen after 2028. We're going to have that conversation again in 4 years once the uniparty right and the tech oligarchs have installed their guy. That's when it can get done. So again, there is Curtis Yarvin. Elon Musk unfollowed him this week. Beth in the chat says the joke on Twitter was that Elon unfollowed him because he was not Indian enough. That's certainly possible. Okay, let's continue with the tech world for just a few more minutes. This is Donald J. Trump on Truth Social a couple nights ago. I am pleased to announce that our great Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, to announce that I am directing our great Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, to be interim administrator of NASA. Sean is doing a tremendous job in handling our country's transportation affairs, including creating a state-of-the-art air traffic control system, while at the same time rebuilding our roads and bridges, making them efficient and beautiful again. He will be a fantastic leader of the ever more important space agency, even if only for a short period of time. Congratulations and thank you, Sean. Now, I think that it's kind of interesting that it went under transportation, and there are other qualities that Sean Duffy has besides his title, and he's a TV character, so maybe that helps out in whatever is to come next at NASA, okay? Or I guess there's at least some possibility that if we are being told the truth about how much industry is happening somewhere in the sky, if that's true, and we're talking about NASA as a transport infrastructure to what's happening in the sky, or at least a regulatory body over that, or whatever NASA ends up becoming, well, maybe at that point, then it's like shipping, like trucking, okay? And if we thought of it that way, from the sky to down here on the ground, all of it encompassed in space, which is all around us everywhere, that would be an interesting reason to have it under transportation. That is purely speculation, okay? I'm just suggesting maybe we get to that point. We are told, we're given hints that that is where we are going. In fact, I just saw an article today with the most ridiculous headline, or sorry, ridiculous main picture. The headline's not great, but hold on one second here. Drugs in space. Let's see what's up with these drugs in space. This was the Disclose headline coming over the feed today. How about that? Just drugs orbiting the ball on a piece of linoleum tile, it looks like. Okay. That's space. So Sean Duffy is going to be the interim NASA administrator. Now, hold on just a second here. Okay. Now it's working properly. I thought I was not going to be able to get us to this post on X, formerly Twitter, because it was deleted, but no, it was just that my link was all jacked up. So Jared Isaacman was the man Trump originally selected to become the new NASA administrator. And then his nomination was rescinded at the beginning of June when Trump and Elon were in the first stages of their celebrity breakup story. Because, of course, as the story goes, Jared Isaacman was Elon Musk's guy. Isaacman went to space multiple times with Elon Musk's SpaceX. And one of those times, he even took a spacewalk. Remember when he just lifted out of the little portal that separates space and the rocket ship, and he kind of just looked like he was climbing up out of the pool, which is not a NASA joke about the International Space Station. So that was the spacewalker, Jared Isaacman, whose appointment had been rescinded by Donald Trump. Well, here's what he had to say the other day in the fallout from this whole Trump and Duffy and NASA situation. He says, a bit of clarification. Though I don't think my circumstances are particularly interesting or consequential, that said, and regardless of the points below, the president is entitled to assemble the leadership team he believes will best serve his administration. I have been relatively apolitical, a right-leaning moderate. And my political donations across both parties, though 10 times more to Republicans, were disclosed in writing with rationale before my nomination was ever submitted to the Senate. Okay. A right-leaning moderate. How many of those are actually MAGA? I would suggest to you the answer is 0. Okay. They might be Republican voters. They might support the entirety of the Republican establishment. They might even do it with true passion, but they're not MAGA. That's what it means to not be MAGA. No Trump supporter, no person who has discovered what America First actually means against this global regime that has been running this country for our entire lifetimes, okay? Understanding the true opposition that exists there, you would then no longer identify as a right-leaning moderate. Could you imagine me calling myself a right-leaning moderate? I'm not a right-leaning moderate. I don't even believe that moderate is a thing, because when you recognize the sides, it's one or the other. There's no moderation in there. It's just people trying to create a personal brand based on what they're for and against. And that is all a calculation of how it's going to work reputation-wise within their social class. Okay, so you're not MAGA, bro. You're a crypto guy who says he walked in space. As for the perceived conflict, I only know Elon professionally, but having flown to space twice on SpaceX rockets, I have a firsthand appreciation for what he and his companies have accomplished. It is also worth pointing out that SpaceX remains the only way American astronauts have been able to travel to and from orbit since the space shuttle was retired in 2011. What happened to NASA? I hold, and by the way, I think that General Quast is going to eventually take over NASA. I don't know that to be true. He hasn't said that's going to be true. He has just been mentioned as a potential Trump nominee, and I would totally support that. I think that Trump rebranding NASA with General Quast leading it would be fantastic. NASA can do other things besides figure out how to get us to Mars. I hold no direct, or this is Isaacman again, I hold no direct or indirect equity in SpaceX or in any aerospace or defense company for that matter. Like all nominees, I signed an ethics letter and would have honored it. Personally, I don't regret anything. It was an honor to even be considered by the president. I loved DC and my brief time in the arena. The real disappointment is the time lost by senators and staff who invested 6 months into a confirmation process that was ultimately withdrawn. Who gives a shit about the time lost by senators and their staff looking into the background of the NASA administrator. Why don't you apologize to all of us, Jared Isaacman? We took our time looking into you too. But we're not senators. I know we're not senators. And you have to kiss ass with these senators because you need something from them, obviously. I'm sad for the senators and their staff who missed out on the extra time they could have spent figuring out how to create laws to screw us. They were busy doing a background check on a spaceman. This leaves NASA without a confirmed leader for what may stretch on for over a year. Oh no, that is not ideal for the world's most accomplished space agency. Well, why not? They haven't gone to space. They haven't taken anybody to orbit in 15 years. Hopefully a new nominee will emerge soon as, oh wait, sorry, I didn't finish the sentence prior. That is not ideal for the world's most accomplished space agency or for America, especially as our geopolitical rivals move at impressive speeds to overtake our edge in the high ground of space. Ah, yes, the Chinese are coming. The Russians are coming to space to beat us to space. And if we understand that to be the threat it was said to be 60 or 70 or 80 years ago, well, then we're going to get totally back on board with it. Yes, yes, we are scared of the Chinese and the Russians and how they're going to beat us to space. Oh, it's exhausting. Hopefully, a new nominee will emerge soon as NASA needs leadership during this uncertain time. Does it? NASA doesn't need to exist. I have been lucky to live the American dream, and if you know anything about me, you know this was never about political ambition, personal gain, or enriching others. Well, thank goodness you said that, or that's exactly what everybody would have thought it was. I love my country, and I care deeply about America's competitiveness and leadership in space. Yes, I'm sure you do. Now, I did not do this to simply besmirch Jared Isaacman, but I would say that is not an entirely sincere and authentic message, and would wonder about what his true intentions are. Now, I had a couple other Isaacman posts pulled based on the Chinese and their energy creation capacity. It was just blowing us away. The Chinese were setting up the equivalent of 3 nuclear power plants a day or something ridiculous based on how quickly they're increasing their electrical output capabilities. And Jared Isaacman is very worried about this. The Trump administration might not be doing enough. And if they don't do enough, then we're going to fall behind the Chinese and the Russians. They're going to create all the electricity and we won't. Now, again, energy resources are an extraordinarily important issue. Okay. We need to create more energy resources. I can get down with that entire agenda. But that agenda also seems to be largely propelled by this same segment of the population. And so we're getting now the pitch that we need to increase our electrical production dramatically. And maybe that's true. They talk about it being true for AI, but the same would be true of Bitcoin, of course. And these are potentially important technologies that we need to be aware of and that we might need to be prepared for. And this would be part of that preparation, assuming the truth of those narratives as we've come to understand them. And that's still, to some significant degree, unproven. Okay. But if you are arguing on the basis that the Chinese and Russians are going to eat our lunch, something they want to do in all of these arenas, they're going to do it here and it'll just be another way. And to stop them, we need to do what the tech oligarchs say. That's not how that case should be made. Okay. That is a sale of something they want to MAGA based on principles they believe will appeal to MAGA, but aren't even true. So it's really important to understand the style of argumentation being made here, okay? It is not a real concern that China and Russia are going to beat us to space. That is a niche concern among tech oligarchs. Again, I'm not saying the technological race is insignificant, and I'm not suggesting that the energy resources are not important. I'm only suggesting that this argument is based on false premises. Okay. The idea being that if we give control over to these people, they're going to save us from the Chinese and the Russians. It's the same argument they make about everything. Okay. We have to bomb this country because if we don't, well, then they're going to nuke us. Same argument. Same people making the same argument. Okay. And if the same people are making the same argument, you should understand, oh, look at that. They're all the same thing ultimately, especially when it's on every issue. And I know they departed. Some of them chose the Republicans this time around. Well, that's because they're rebranding Republicans as the thing that those people also do, right? It's just the same group of people. Let us continue. So, and this segue is going to be an unfortunate one because the same group of people that I was just referring to is not the Jews, although it also includes, of course, many people who call themselves Jews. All right. That is just an unfortunate layout of the tech segment of the show as I had prepared it. But we saw a very interesting phenomenon over the past week. I discussed it a little bit with my pal, Ghost of Base Patrick Henry on Badlands Daily this morning. But we've had a series of events that I think we can see as part of a whole. And the first would be the Epstein letter coming out the day before Benjamin Netanyahu was set to arrive in America to meet with Donald Trump for a series of days. He ended up extending his trip and then cutting it shorter than some people thought it was going to go. He was not supposed to come back to Israel without a deal on the Gaza ceasefire, but it turns out he has. So Epstein letter Sunday night, Bibi Netanyahu visit on Monday. What were they going to do with the Benjamin Netanyahu visit relative to Jeffrey Epstein on Monday if the Trump administration, in an anonymous and unsigned letter, put out the claim that there was nothing left to see on Epstein? Now, we know Epstein Mossad connections, Epstein Israel connections. So that would then imply an Epstein Netanyahu connection. All right. And that could be used against Netanyahu to affect those negotiations. Okay. Because we are talking about Netanyahu as our boy Yuhu having separate motivations from what the normal identification of Netanyahu, a member of the uniparty right of the highest level of the regime. If we understand that identity to be false, even in a relative sense, compared to the hardliners, the real neocons in Israel, who are working with the uniparty left in Israel to eliminate Netanyahu, then we can see why an attack based on the Epstein thing to thwart those negotiations would make a lot of sense. And because of that, we can see why the timing of the release of that unsigned anonymous Epstein letter, joint letter between the FBI and the DOJ, would have come out in one of the worst news cycle times along the worst news cycle schedule that you could possibly imagine. Sunday evening? Okay, so that's weird already. Now, the next evening, Tuesday, Monday, Bibi Netanyahu comes. All right, the story plays out. The Epstein story plays out, and Netanyahu arrives. Well, Tuesday evening, we get Grok going fully based. Okay, that's how it's described by some people. Others would describe it as fully anti-Semitic. Now, I wouldn't equate those things because you can be based, and that based is more than just being truthful about things people would call anti-Semitic in order to get you not to be truthful about them. Based goes much further than that. There are plenty of people out there who are totally red-pilled, quote unquote, about the Jews, who are nonetheless not very based. Okay. So those two things are separate, but Grok just began spitting out anti-Israel responses. And some of that was because of the prompts that were used to generate those responses. And it is important to consider that. But it was also just the idea that the machine now was no longer protecting the Jews. Okay. And that story comes out, that phenomenon emerges on Tuesday evening. And then Wednesday morning, we get the resignation of Linda Yaccarino as CEO of X, formerly Twitter. She's been there for about 2 years. You can remember when Elon Musk brought her in, everyone was like, why is the World Economic Forum person becoming the CEO of our free speech platform after people who weren't us were censored? I'm taking on the persona of a uniparty right Twitter bro gathered around the intellectual kids table, thinking that they are super edgy about so many things. They're always the first to say, Trump is done. Still believe in elections, got vaccinated. These people are retarded. But they were certain that it was a free speech site. They were worried about the World Economic Forum lady. And then because they were so enamored with Elon Musk and his wide reach on social media, they forgave the World Economic Forum lady while she ran their free speech site for 2 years, making it not a free speech site. Remember, freedom of speech, not freedom of reach? That's Yaccarino. So this is the New York Times. Ex-chief says she is leaving the social media platform. In a post on X, Yaccarino said, when Elon Musk and I first spoke of his vision for X, I knew it would be the opportunity of a lifetime to carry out the extraordinary mission of this company. I'm immensely grateful to him for entrusting me. She did not provide a reason for her departure. So we can leave the story aside. I don't find Linda Yaccarino interesting enough to spend an inordinate amount of time on. But it's awfully interesting that she was leaving one day after Grok went super based and anti-Semitic and said to the world again, hey, remember how you thought Twitter was anti-Semitic and that's why the advertisers are leaving? And then Linda Yaccarino came in to make them all know that everything was okay. Well, it's like that again. It's super anti-Semitic. And now Linda Yaccarino, rather than arriving to fix things, is leaving. Now, what would have happened if, and then, by the way, the last part of that story is that Grok 4 came out that evening. So we had Grok going based. The next morning, Linda Yaccarino resigning from X, formerly Twitter. And then that evening, X, formerly Twitter, releasing the new version of Grok. What would have happened if Grok went totally based and anti-Semitic on that same evening when Grok 4 was released after Linda Yaccarino had already resigned? That would seem like Elon Musk is taking back control of X, formerly Twitter, and turning it against the Jews. And I can imagine that's how it would have been presented. And I think we were to explore it deeply, we could probably find places it was being presented that way. And we saw Media Matters the other day going after TikTok. It was a story from last week, but we talked about it on Tuesday. And so you would see the motivation to do that again on X, formerly Twitter, and then press for censorship. Censorship of the AI, but censorship of everybody. Remember, freedom of speech, not freedom of reach. It's already baked into the system. You're not even allowed to expect legitimate freedom of speech. You can only expect to be able to send your post out and probably not get suspended or banned from the platform, though they still do that too. Okay, so there's no freedom of speech anywhere in there. But the point I'm making is that I think now in two instances that you can kind of link together, you've seen this phenomenon where it's very likely something would have happened differently the next day if not for the story that came out to short circuit that thing the night before. Okay. That's a false start. We've talked about that for many years now. Alex Jones on pandemics, for instance. Oh, in 3 weeks, you're going to release the next pandemic. And then there's stories about the next pandemic and everybody's like, yeah, but you know, that's fake. Alex Jones already told us about it. So that's kind of the effect that I am seeing here. And you can judge that for yourself. But we have talked for many years about the Trump is Hitler op, the pro-Hitler op that has been developing in the uniparty right segment of X, formerly Twitter, around the intellectual kids table for the last 2 or 3 years. And it's more just since October 7th, but there were a significant number of people in the info op already doing that thing before October 7th. And then it was just heightened and made more divisive after that. But they're not engaged with the entirety of the conversation. They're just doing the Twitter thing to get likes and follows. They're trying to win social credits and fiat tokens online and hopefully impress Elon Musk enough that he retweets them and then their audience grows by leaps and bounds. Okay. So that op, the pro-Hitler thing, has been going on for quite a long time. And then this week we get the announcement, and I'm sure it's been released, although it's not the sort of thing I'd bother listening to, of Candace Owens, formerly of the Daily Weimar, still kind of the same production that she had then, right? She left because she just couldn't deal with Ben Shapiro. She couldn't say the things that she wanted to say. She couldn't tell you the truth about Israel if she was working for Ben Shapiro at the Daily Weimar. So she moved just a little bit outside, just like Jordan Peterson, amount of separation, still totally the same thing, but acts like it's not. I mean, Jordan Peterson is still definitely on the Daily Weimar. Don't get me wrong. He just has a slightly different branding than the rest of Daily Weimar. They're the political people over at Daily Weimar. And Jordan Peterson is just the wise sage who tells everyone how reality is exactly the way the television has always said it was. All right. So Candace Owens, super based and red pilled. She's the truth teller about Israel. And now she's having Nick Fuentes on, who's like the truth teller of all truth tellers about Israel. It basically goes like Europa, Nick Fuentes, and then you start breaking into the mainstream and, you know, the rest of the Twitter op, the pro-Hitler Twitter op. And then you get into the mainstream with Candace Owens being one of the leading people there. And people would say that Tucker Carlson is as well, because he's had Daryl Cooper on and, you know, argued a little bit with Ted Cruz about, you know, both of them intentionally misunderstanding what the Bible says. But the two of them coming out to mainstream Nick Fuentes and again launch the next phase of that pro-Hitler op that is meant to entrap Trump and MAGA. Okay. That's what it's meant for. All right. You can think whatever you want about the Nazis and the Jews back in World War II. The Zionists and the Nazis were partners in a business venture to seize and set up the proxy state of Israel. Okay. Everything that comes after that is subordinate to that fact. All right. The story, no matter whether it's true or false, has been used to remove any sort of nationalist or populist ideology from the conversation for 3 generations. That's an awfully long time. That's a very effective info op. Okay. I don't care if you're making the same arguments as Europa and think the Nazis were the good guys because Hitler said he was going to give his people things. All right. You're just a socialist at that point. All right. And again, I'm not trying to hash out that argument. Like it if you want. Okay. If you find it convincing, all good, but understand that you are still within the comfortable bounds of the controlled opposition with that viewpoint. All right. And when you understand the system of power to exist entirely within that controlled opposition dynamic, pressing the other side of it and mainstreaming it doesn't get you out. All right. All it does is fortify that side of the controlled opposition dynamic. And I would suggest that's what Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes were doing. All right. And so then that's going to cause a reaction from the side of the ADL and Media Matters and the rest of it. All right. So they would have been going after Netanyahu, blaming Elon Musk and Twitter for this outbreak in anti-Semitism. And then they would have two characters besides Elon to go after with all their hatred. And then we have the virality of the pro-Hitler op finally reaching its effective form. Okay. It was a fringe movement that they are now attempting to mainstream. And so I would look at all of these issues this week kind of in some combination. Okay. These have commonalities that I don't think should be ignored. All right. So I mentioned Jeffrey Epstein. I just did some editing in the run of show. I think we should just talk Epstein right now. And people on Substack, I guess, we're having some trouble with the Rumble link. There's a paywall so that the paid subscribers have access to the link, and so that free subscribers do not. That's how the paid subscriber stream functions on the back end, on my end. Okay. And so if you happen to be in the, signed into the wrong Substack or whatever, maybe you wouldn't have been able to see that link, but it is right there, like 4 lines down in the email announcing the subscriber stream. So you can check that at any time and then watch on Rumble Premium and participate in the chat over there if that's what you like to do. Okay. Let's keep going. This is Axios from today. Scoop. This is Mark Caputo, by the way, who gets every story and goes on War Room a lot. So I'm just saying, wittingly or unwittingly, it seems that Mark Caputo has been selected as a purveyor of info ops. And again, maybe unwitting, but he's done a number of stories over the past few months, and particularly the past few weeks. Let me actually see. I want to remember what exactly it was. Yes. He was the one who was disclosed the extremely real story about Elon Musk and Scott Bessent having a physical altercation in the halls of the West Wing. Elon Musk just checking him into the boards, putting a shoulder into his chest. Can you imagine that actually happening? I cannot. It doesn't matter how much ketamine Elon Musk would have been on. Okay. I don't actually believe that Elon Musk was on ketamine, in case anybody is triggered by that and thinking, Elon Musk isn't on ketamine. Okay. I still have the voice of the great collective normie out there just screaming into my brain from my long-term exposure to Hollywood and understanding the mindset and how that mind operates. If you want to disagree with something, find one minute aspect that you can disagree with, then attack that one minute aspect, and then suggest that because of that, the whole thing has to be relinquished. That is not very smart. Okay. Let's see what this has to say. Dan Bongino clashes with AG Bondi over the handling of the Epstein files. Now, wait a second. All 3 of these people were significant members of the fantasy team and the TV characters right from the get-go. Pam Bondi, Dan Bongino, Kash Patel. They're all linked together. Now, Matt Gaetz was supposed to have Pam Bondi's job. And Todd Blanche and Emile Beauvais were already doing Pam Bondi's job before Pam Bondi arrived. But Pam Bondi is definitely the person at DOJ. Trump says she's doing a great job all the time. FBI Director Dan Bongino took a day off from work Friday after clashing at the White House with Attorney General Pam Bondi over their handling of the Jeffrey Epstein files, 4 sources familiar said. And let this go for just a minute because I failed to pull up the archived version, which is the only version. Well, actually, let me see that article. And here we are. And, just a little tip for people out there. The archive version is almost always available. Okay. Why it matters. The dispute erupted Wednesday amid the fallout of the administration walking back its claims about Epstein by determining the convicted sex offender didn't have a celebrity client list and that he wasn't murdered in his New York prison cell in 2019. Bongino didn't come to work Friday, leading some insiders to believe he had quit. But administration officials say he is still on the job, even as the internal tension over the Epstein case continues. Wow. Well, that's pretty interesting. A source close to Bongino, though, said he ain't coming back. Really? Well, that's very interesting. Now we have, depending on which side you're on, a good cop, bad cop between Bongino and Bondi. Their names both start with Bond and end with vowels. Or Bond, I mean. How can they be fighting, is what I'm saying. Also, how can the TV characters and members of the fantasy team be fighting with one another? Because they were both obviously the best choice. And that's why we trusted Trump, okay? We definitely knew what Trump was thinking with each of his selections. And that's how we knew that each one of his selections was the best possible person for the job in the real world. That's why we had to be attacked for questioning them in favor of trusting Trump. Oh, well, I trust Trump. Oh, well, I trust Trump. That is the dumbest, okay? The point of the entire thing, the awakening, is to understand that we shouldn't trust strangers in positions of power, okay? We should still, no matter how much we like them, think for ourselves. Did we do that? Of course not. All right, so let's skip down to the cash thing here. The big picture. The blowup involving Trump's senior law enforcement officials showed just how much the administration has been rocked by its handling of the Epstein case. I would suggest to you that if that Epstein letter rug pulled a narrative op that was set to commence Monday morning prior to Bibi's arrival, the same system that was producing that info op would be reacting to the release of that letter this way, trying to make it as big a deal and as divisive as possible. And Trump's response the other day in the cabinet meeting to the mainstream media, asking him those questions about Jeffrey Epstein, would then make a bunch of sense in that light. All right. Trump is attempting to thwart the media's effort to make this an attack point within his administration. He wants to move past that. Now we can see why. And again, you might think, well, the chronology, it just doesn't work. How are they going to know consistently what's going to happen the next day? Well, it's because they have access to all the information. Okay. They have it all. That's what that means. All we need to understand is that theoretically, all the data can be compiled and analyzed in one place. All of everyone's data can be compiled, captured, compiled, and analyzed in one place. And then you know what all the attacks are going to be before they happen. And then you can figure out how to thwart those attacks. And I have suggested many times, I think that's what's going on. And I think that's what's going on here. Okay. And so all of these occurrences look different in that light. And I would suggest that that is the proper light. Now, Laura Loomer, another semi-frequent guest and sometimes guest of War Room, though also a major pro-Israel, Israel first kind of person, says scoop and then delivers the same scoop that was given to Mark Caputo. She said Cash and Bongino are livid with Pam Bondi over her DOJ memo and the lack of transparency from her office regarding the Epstein files. Source tells me Bongino is taking the day off today from his job as deputy director of the FBI, and now there is speculation on whether or not he will return to his job at the FBI over his disgust with Blondie's lack of transparency and handling of the Epstein files. Blondie has brought total embarrassment to Trump, J.D. Vance, Bongino, and Kash Patel. How is she embarrassing J.D. Vance? He's the understudy. He's a backup dancer, okay? He's not even in the picture. He's not even a main character. I'm told Cash and Bongino are furious with Blondie and the blowback she has caused them with her lack of transparency. They should call for her resignation, suggests Loomer. Well, that's quite interesting. Todd Blanche. Oh, goodness gracious. Give me just 1 second here. I believe that I blew it on the Blanche. Let me see if I can get this from my history. I know that I had pulled a Blanche tweet. Ah, yes. Here it is. Todd Blanche at the DOJ, one of Trump's lawyers during the period of fake indictments during the fake and illegitimate administration of Joe Biden, said, I worked closely with Cash and Bongino on the joint FBI and DOJ memo regarding the Epstein files. All of us signed off on the contents of the memo and the conclusions stated in the memo. The suggestion by anyone that there was any daylight between the FBI and DOJ leadership on this memo's composition and release is patently false. That's incredible. We can assume that Todd Blanche is telling the truth. So he's saying that Kash Patel and Dan Bongino were fully aware of the contents of that memo before it was released. So then they can't possibly be mad at Pam Bondi for releasing that memo. It's not Bondi's fault that the memo was released. If anything, all this is starting to make Bondi look pretty good. Blanche doesn't mention Bondi. And if Bondi's just a TV character, which is possible, then fine. If the work is being done by Blanche and Beauvais and the organization under them, although I think Beauvais might have moved on, then just fine. You know, I don't know the exact situation. That's just a level of obscurity that we can't quite bypass. But if we assume that Bondi is running the entirety of the DOJ and this was assigned to Blanche and his people and Cash and Bongino to sort out before the memo was released, well, now they are committed to that memo. Okay. So do you trust Todd Blanche to be telling you the truth about Cash and Bongino's involvement in the memo? Or do you trust this source that says, based on the real piece of information, we're told, that Bongino stayed home? Bongino and Bondi are at loggerheads. They are, he thinks that Bondi has fallen down on the job, done a terrible job. She hasn't released the Epstein files. He can't even work for her at the FBI anymore. That's what we're being told. That extremely dramatic story is now totally refuted by Todd Blanche. Was that story ever true? Chances that story were true are just about zero. So why was that narrative op run? Seems like an anti-Bondi op, okay? And it seems like a fake anti-Bondi effort that diffused a real anti-Bondi effort. And I hope that makes sense. I would suggest that that is exactly what we are seeing. Okay. Oh, there was my Blanche letter. Jeez. I went all out of order. This is what happens when you go out of order. Okay. Let me take a drink of water because my voice sounds terrible. All right, I'm going to check the chat. Wow. Beth is just laying it down. She said that Loomer has responded to Blanche. And so we might as well go ahead and pull that up. And those were 2 $5 Rumble rants from Beth. Thank you very much, Beth. You are a great help. Here is Loomer's response. How come nobody signed their name to the memo, Todd Blanche? My sources tell me the FBI wanted to release more information about Epstein, and Pam Bondi and her DOJ said no. This has caused tension between Blondie, Cash, and Bongino. Asking for transparency isn't difficult. Blondie is literally blowing up the Trump administration by concealing information, spending time on Fox News, lying to MAGA base, and by releasing contradictory statements. Now, is she really blowing up the Trump administration? I think that any reports of the Trump administration being blown up are just rumors and overblown. That is ridiculous. There is information that can be released to the that the public wants to see. Why was the memo released on a Sunday night on the 4th of July weekend with no official signage and no names of any administration officials? Good point. You only release memos on Sunday evening on holiday weekends when you don't want anyone paying attention to the contents. Again, that's what I just said not too long ago. Trump's team needs to read the room. Blondie has been very damaging to the administration, and she has damaged public trust in the DOJ. The DOJ shouldn't be trusted. The DOJ should not exist. The federal police force, known as the FBI, should not exist. All of these things should be removed. The DOJ exists, especially the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ, exists to enforce the law that was created in the constitutional inversion that occurred in the Reconstruction Amendments. Okay? They are dependent on the 14th Amendment. That has to go at some point. And we are in the process of that. Okay? Even if the original Constitution is already fully functional right now, at some point, we're going to get a story about the 14th Amendment going away. It has to go away. It is itself an inversion of that original Constitution. So if we are going back toward the original Constitution, it is unavoidable that the 14th Amendment has to be done away with. Okay? It is a necessary waypoint along the road. So Bondi, according to Loomer, is hurting President Trump and his staff and advisors. She lied on national TV and needs to be held accountable. Now, Laura Loomer has been going after Bondi, I think, for quite a while, hence the name Blondie there, which, you know, is obviously, I mean, Pam Bondi is blonde. So calling her Blondie is a pretty obvious and irrelevant joke. I mean, who cares, right? But there is some derision in there. And so maybe it's just kind of fake derision, right? People have talked about the potential that Donald Trump doing that with Ron DeSantis, calling him Meatball Ron, and the rest of it was just part of the kayfabe. So it's entirely possible that they're disseminating stories from the Todd Blanche serious side of things to these people who get special scoops from unnamed and unidentified sources. And by the way, I don't know Steve Bannon's the source for those claims, but Mark Caputo and Laura Loomer, Bannon seems to be upstream from both of them. So, hey, just saying. Now, would he have access to know that Bongino would have skipped work? That's the sort of story that doesn't even require reality. Okay. Who notices? Dan Bongino. His car's not in the parking lot. Call the press. Let them know that there is a rift between Dan Bongino and Pam Bondi because his car's not in the parking lot. Give me a break, okay? All right. Let's go quickly through some rescission and Fed stuff. Man, oh man, I am not going to get to so many things. Holy moly. I could start a 3-hour episode right now. And I'm not saying I'm going to do that because I don't think my voice would last for another 3 hours. But in the meantime, Polymathanon has sent a $5 Rumble rant. Great show as always. Hashtag Beth helps out. Yes, she does. APL does not. Well, that's true, but we can always have hope for the future of Unapanuna. And we'll give a Gutfeld Una.
Anapolina Luna. All right.
Thanks for watching, Greg Gutfeld or Greg Gutfeld's writers or producers. Let me know when you want to pay me for the jokes you steal. Okay. Bay Theater Dave says I need to get my shit together in terms of putting together too much content, I guess. Yeah, you're right. I do. But the way I go about it now, and honestly, I really like having some days between shows because I get to observe the narrative from one step further back and be a little bit more holistic in my approach. And I think that that is very helpful. But part of that approach is whenever I see something that sounds like signal, that and many times you're going to see that days before the show in my Telegram feed or on Truth Social. I'll take that link or that story, that video, whatever it is, put it in the notes and understand that that's going to be part of my next show. And then there'll be 50 of those things that you then mix and match and rearrange and then figure out the order of the show. So that's the process. And because of that, I end up with sometimes way too much stuff, and line up all these segments with 5 or 10 or 15 different elements. And all of a sudden you are never going to get all of it done, even in a 3-hour show. So Bay Theater Dave, you are right, as you often are. Here is Donald Trump talking about mentioning our new favorite word, rescissions. It would have been nice if he said impoundment, but we'll go for rescissions right now. It is very important that all Republicans adhere to my rescissions bill, and in particular, defund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, PBS and NPR, which is worse than CNN and MSDNC put together. Any Republican that votes to allow this monstrosity to continue broadcasting will not have my support or endorsement. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Donald Trump is using fake elections as his leverage. Isn't that interesting? Does that imply a real threat? I would suggest the answer is no. And so instead, what we're having is a push of the rescissions issue to the front of the public conversation. And by the way, I should have mentioned this earlier, that first tech article about pimping the tech oligarchs to MAGA was written by a man. I mentioned his name at the beginning. I think it's Paul Steidler, who is a member of the think tank, the Lexington Institute. Okay. The Lexington Institute is directly funded by Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, the military industrial complex. Okay. The military contractors, that is a think tank that they have set up and funded to do advocacy on their behalf. And so that is what Steidler was doing. He was, in the form of J.D. Vance, as the salesman to MAGA, pitching the tech oligarch agenda in direct opposition to Steve Bannon's populist nationalism or nationalist populism. I think he says it both ways. Okay. Isn't that interesting that the military industrial complex, as it has always been, is financing that viewpoint for the benefit of the tech oligarchs? It's almost like there's something else going on there besides them just making their honest appeals to MAGA, whom they are fully aligned with. They're not aligned with MAGA at all, okay? They are attempting to use MAGA as a skin suit. They're going to be together with MAGA for now, and then when the pro-Nazi op comes in for the full divide, when Trump becomes Hitler and we become the Nazis, well, then where do the tech oligarchs go? They're like, oh, wait a second. We were just neocons the whole time. We're not with them. Look at us. We're Jewish. We can't be with them. And then you get immediately pushed off into the same story progression that we've seen now with the Nazis throughout our lifetimes. Okay. That story wasn't always the way we were taught it. Okay. It wasn't that story. The story was not that way at the time. The story became the story over many, many, many cycles, 60 years, 80 years worth of cycles of revisions and reinterpretations, so that now the story we're all indoctrinated with has virtually no connection. It's played a game of telephone for 80 years. All right. And we're coming out on the other end of that being like, oh yeah, sure. That's what World War II is about. No, it wasn't. They were setting up the state of Israel. Okay. The Balfour Declaration was what brought the United States into World War I. Then the United States and those same allies in World War II helped, quote unquote, defeat the Nazis in Europe as they had just moved to Israel and Argentina and America and the rest of it. Okay. The neoconservative regime never disappears. Right. That's their goal, at least. Hopefully that's going to work out for the first time properly here, because we're seeing all these extended cycles of that cleaving taking place. All right. So that at some point we will be able to clearly identify that part of the enemy. And again, it's not the Jews, although it does include many people who call themselves Jews. Okay. To be very clear about that, it would be wonderful. I support anti-Zionist Jews, okay? Because I oppose Zionism. I don't oppose people having different religious beliefs. I think they're wrong and that they need to work their way all the way through that until they reach the correct one, okay? But I don't want them to be exterminated because of that, all right? What I want is for bad people to stop doing bad things, and many of those people are probably not Jewish, though they call themselves Jewish. All right. And, you know, the Khazarian thing, that's got a serious academic history to it. It's worth looking at. Arthur Kessler's, what is it called? The 13th tribe or the 12th? No, 13th tribe. So, you know, if those are just Khazarians who have adopted a Jewish identity to use part of that story and the religious beliefs, quote unquote, as justification for their agenda, that's an entirely different thing than being opposed to Jews. All right. Anyhow, that's those neocons. Got to be careful about those neocons. All right, let's get back. I went off track. I shouldn't have tangented so far away on that weave. That wasn't really a weave because I have a link right in front of me and I've already got the run of the story set up, but I do weave within the framework. The GOP-led Congress has until July 18th to approve more than $9 billion in cuts put forward by the Trump administration in a rescissions package. The cuts target the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which oversees PBS and NPR, money for USAID and agencies like the U.S. Institute of Peace, which Trump aimed to dismantle via executive order signed in February. The House approved the request last month, but it's largely been on the back burner since, as Republicans, and this article has so many typos, as Republicans worked to pass Trump's big, beautiful bill, now the Senate is set to take it up. Susan Collins is opposed. Mike Rounds has expressed reservations. Okay, so you're getting the regime argument, you're getting the Trump side, and then they have to say, well, you know, some GOP senators aren't totally sold on this idea of defunding NPR and PBS and USAID. Really? Why is anyone in the Republican establishment going against Trump when it comes to the state media that propagandizes American citizens? They're not against that. Of course, they're not against that because the propaganda is on behalf of the Uniparty and they are members of the Uniparty. They work for the Uniparty, not for the American people. Their job is, as employees of the Uniparty, to market the Uniparty's agenda to the American people and convince the American people it is actually what they chose and in their best interests. Okay. And they have no choice anyway. So you got to have somebody selling it. And that's what they do. It's not the other way around where we tell them what we need and then they sell that agenda to the representatives of everyone else. It's just the global regime through the politicians and the media to us with the expectation that we ascribe to one side or the other of the controlled opposition dynamic within the Uniparty. Right? Let's keep going. Okay, so when you think of rescissions and impoundment, you think of Russ Vought, or at least I do. Here's Russ Vought on X, formerly Twitter, yesterday. Chairman Jerome Powell has grossly mismanaged the Fed while continuing to run a deficit since fiscal year 23. The first time in the Fed's history, the Fed is way over budget on the renovation of its headquarters, now up to $2.5 billion, roughly $700 million over its initial cost. These renovations include terrace rooftop gardens, water features, VIP elevators, and premium marble. The cost per square foot is $1,923, double the cost for renovating an ordinary historic federal building. The Palace of Versailles would have cost $3 billion in today's dollars. Unfortunately, Powell's recent testimony to Congress has led to serious questions that now require additional oversight from OMB, that's his office, in conjunction with the National Capital Planning Commission. Today, I sent the letter below to Chairman Powell to get to the bottom of this largesse. And so there is some suggestion that the Fed chairman, Jerome Powell, has run afoul of the law by lying to an illegitimate Congress. Now, I'm not particularly concerned about the law there or any potential violation. That is not the way the story is going to go. The story is going to go obviously this way. It's good cop, bad cop, and a cycle of reruns on Jerome Powell. Will he be fired? Will he not be fired? Will he be fired? Will he not be fired? Will there be a shadow Jerome Powell? Will there not be? It goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth because we're told that if the bad thing happens, well, the markets, they're just going to revolt. And Trump can't have that. What's going to happen if the markets revolt? And all of that is dependent on us believing that the markets are not manipulated all the time for the benefit of the institutions by the institutions. But they are that way. So all then we hear, whatever. I was going to go one direction with that sentence, and then I kind of hit a brick wall, so I turned a different direction. Now I've forgotten it completely. Oh, man, it's Friday. What the heck was I saying? Jerome Powell, will he or will he not be fired? The markets are going to react. And if it turned out that the markets were a function of actual free markets properly regulated, well, then that might be a concern, but that's not what it is. So the concern simply vanishes, as does the rationale for that argument. All right. So that is not what's restraining Trump from firing Jerome Powell. All right. It's not that the markets are going to react and that Trump fears the markets. It's that it's not time yet. Why is it not time? Well, because the adjustment needs to be made under Powell so that the scapegoat who has been prepared will be the one to be slaughtered. Okay. The effect will happen under Powell, so it doesn't happen and would then be attributed to Donald Trump. Now, we don't need to worry about that because we are looking well past whatever emotional response we might have to the financial adjustment. I don't think we're going to have a collapse, but adjustment at some point that is inevitable. All right. So where is the cause of the problem assigned? The media is going to assign it to Trump. Trump will have, by that point, already assigned the guilt and responsibility to Jerome Powell and the elements of the regime. And again, that's what the info op is for. He plays both sides, and we can see an example of that right here in this CNN article from earlier today, what Trump's increasingly aggressive attacks on Powell are all about. And I just want to focus quickly right here. With Trump's frustration over the Fed's refusal to bow to his pressure to lower rates growing by the day, it is the most consequential step taken thus far to bring that threat to Powell's doorstep, and that being this look into Jerome Powell's activity. They say down here, Russ Vought triggered that sequence with a letter to Powell, which he posted publicly on social media, suggesting Powell may have broken the law in his stewardship of a planned renovation. Okay. So that's the escalation, the Trump side escalation against Powell. Listen to what it says here, though. It also serves as the clearest window into the expanding effort to change Powell and the Federal Open Market Committee's insistence on independence. Just 3 weeks, Trump candidly acknowledged his attempts had failed. Now, that's, again, another sentence written in a mainstream media outlet that does not make any sense. Reread your article. Phil Mattingly, constant television character on CNN. Get out of the way. Okay. Here's Trump. I call him every name in the book, trying to get him to do something, Trump said, expressing bewilderment over Powell's impervious response to his powers of persuasion. I do it every way in the book. I'm nasty. I'm nice. Nothing works. I'm bad cop. I'm good cop. And somehow Jerome Powell just won't lower those darn rates. Try being nice. Try being mean. I say bad things about Jerome Powell. I say nice things about Jerome Powell. I'm the one who appointed him, and he's definitely not doing the thing I want him to do. And no matter what I try, being mean to him or being nice to him, nothing seems to work. Does Trump have the constitutional authority to remove Jerome Powell as the Fed chair? Of course he does, because there's no such thing as independent agencies. But the Federal Reserve exists and operates outside of the purview of the constitutional form of government. It is a branch of the global regime. Now, there's been some suggestion, the most work has been done by Joe Lang on this, but that Fed will be brought back under Treasury. Just so happens that Scott Bessent is suggested as one of the potential replacements for Jerome Powell as Fed chair, which would make sense because he's already running Treasury. Just saying. There are other suggestions there as well. But if you were going to bring the Fed under Treasury, well, it would make sense then to just have the Treasury Secretary oversee the Fed. I don't know that that's what's going to happen, but there's a logic to that. And I think that that logic is sound enough to suggest that the Fed coming back under Treasury is happening, which means, therefore, it already happened in the first term. And I think that that's kind of, as far as I'm concerned, that's just a done deal. So, but Trump can be nice. Trump can be mean. Trump can be good cop. Trump can be bad cop. And he is both of them, so that the proper conversation is had in public and the public can reach some sort of consensus. And that consensus always aligns with Donald Trump, and it always eventually moves in the direction of the right position, the constitutionally oriented position, the founder-oriented position, the American maximalist position, and I would suggest, hopefully, if we do our job right, the moral position or the Christian position, or however you want to think of that. Okay, this is Donald Trump on Truth Social yesterday. Tech stocks, industrial stocks, NASDAQ hit all-time record highs. Crypto, quote, through the roof, end quote. NVIDIA is up 47% since Trump tariffs. Really? I think it was just announced yesterday that they were the world's first company with a $4 trillion valuation. USA is taking in hundreds of billions of dollars in tariffs. Country is now, quote unquote, back. A great credit. Fed should rapidly lower rates to reflect this strength. USA should be at the, quote unquote, top of the list. No inflation. And Donald Trump is saying there's no inflation based on the tariffs. That seems to be the case. We were told inflation was going to be out of control. Prices were going to be out of control. Everything would be terrible if we had these tariffs. Moms couldn't get strollers or diapers or whatever. It's going to hurt the babies. Anyway. Wait a second here. Never mind. There was an unbelievable AI video on 9/11 that came out last night, by the way. Maybe I'll play it at some point. One more quote, though, from Trump on Truth Social about the Fed chairman, Jerome Powell, with whom he is playing good cop and bad cop at the same time. We're getting the bad cop face primarily. Too late. That's Jerome Powell, quote unquote, too late. That's his name. Too late, Jerome Powell. So when Powell does the thing, what is Trump going to call it? Too late. Whose responsibility will the problem then become? Understanding that it was Jerome Powell who waited too long to do the thing that he's going to do eventually? It's Jerome Powell's fault and problem. It's the Fed's fault and problem, but it is not Donald Trump's. Now, again, people are like, well, you know, if Trump's actually the impetus and the motivation for all the timing and that problem occurs, well, then it's really still Trump's fault on some level. Is it? The regime could have come clean about everything and relinquished control and solved these problems without creating these huge adjustments and huge problems. So from that standpoint, it's hard to see as Donald Trump's fault. Also, the people aren't driving him to the places he needs to go because we're too busy trusting the plan at a level. The people who understand what is happening or what might be happening or have tracked this thing closely, as I would suggest I have, Badlands has, and all of you have. Many people in that broader truth community orbit are not willing to press Trump in directions because they're too busy trusting the plan and making sure that everybody else trusts the plan, which just means whatever the TV shows, we're going to analyze it or play match with it online and find little number patterns. We're going to do Kabbalistic numerology online and tell you what your future is. Hey, it's divination. You dorks. It's so silly. Anyhow, the point is, we could be moving ahead on that timeline, and then Trump would be moving forward more quickly because the public is already aligned with where he needs to go. All right. That's what gives him the opportunity. We have to blow that hole in the enemy's defense wide open so Trump can bring everyone else through. All right. That's what we got to be doing. And instead, we're like, man, I hope Trump decides to bring those people through sometime soon. We're just waiting on that. You're just waiting on the entire project to be finished before you think about maybe you got to do something on your own. Really? Seems odd to me, but what do I know? All right, let us continue. We are through the Jerome Powell section. We are still not in or through the John Brennan and investigation section, nor are we into the purge at the State Department, nor Netanyahu's visit, nor weapons to Ukraine, nor the Secretary of War, nor the BRICS meeting, and the tariffs and the tariff letters. So I guess you can weigh in the chat and let me know which you would prefer. But I'm going to start with the John Brennan thing because there's some truly enjoyable video along with that segment. Did I just actually move on from Jerome Powell? I moved on from Jerome Powell too quickly. Let me finish this up and then we'll get into John Brennan. Too late demeans the great credit of the USA. We are now again the #1 credit in the world. Giant comeback, quote unquote. The Fed rate should be reflective of this. We should be at the top of the list. Lower the rate. That's pretty incredible. We have the #1 credit rating, so we are the country most likely to pay back the Federal Reserve, and therefore we should be charged lower interest rates. It's quite an argument. How did we get there? Tariffs, return to actual market-based trade, a decoupling from our production capacity being permanently housed in other countries and paying dividends to the regime rather than America. Yeah, I'd say all of those things would probably make America a better bet when it comes to our fiscal health. So a lower credit rate, or a lower interest rate based on good credit only makes sense. But too late is not going to do it. So when it finally happens, the problems will be too late's fault. And the people having the problems be the enemy people. Because our side primarily has already gone through those problems. 2020 caused so many of us to adjust. And there's a lot of Republican normies out there who have not adjusted, so they are excluded from that thing. They're still going to have the adjustment to come because they haven't prepared for any of it. They haven't even been attached to reality this whole time. All right. The people out there supporting Ron DeSantis, talking about JD Vance 2028, supporting Ukraine, supporting Israel, not able to get down to the roots of any of these problems and understand that down there, none of these things should be supported. Okay. Every time you support those things, you are supporting an enemy agenda. And if it was a good agenda, if it was only the good twin being helped, you got to wonder why we're not being sold that story by those people if they wanted our buy-in. Okay. Now, Trump might be the catalyst for the movement in that direction, and he hasn't said it yet, but Trump is analyzed differently than everyone else. And I think that that is entirely justifiable. Okay. He is at the top of the information stream, even if there's a level above Trump in terms of military control, and Trump is a public-facing communications strategist for that thing, who is then the avatar of our government and represents the change mechanism. Even if that's all Donald Trump is, he is still ahead of the rest of the information stream because he's retrieving it directly from that source. And again, all this is worldly stuff. which means all the worldly priorities have to be looked after and aligned with and taken care of on an ethical, a moral, a godly level. Okay. All right. Let's get into John Brennan. Beth said the numbers stuff is weird. Yes, the numbers stuff is weird. I get that numbers are a way to play match online. That doesn't mean that every time there is a match, there is some great meaning to be taken away, and that it means Patriots in control or Patriots control the entire media. I'm not saying those things aren't possible, but being able to find a match online is not proof of that. Okay. It is the same thing as I remember, there used to be magazines, right? We just have websites now. And in the gossip magazines, they would always have the monthly horoscopes. Like, oh, well, let's see what my horoscope is. No matter what your horoscope says, you can match that horoscope to your life. Okay. It's just a matter of perspective, right? And if you took those 12 horoscopes and detached them from their assigned zodiac sign and just shuffled them and mixed them up and then reassigned them, they could go in any order and you would still find that that horoscope matches your circumstances. You would still retroactively align and believe, oh yeah, I was already thinking that. That's what it's designed to do. Okay. And if you can find a match with the meaning detached, just the same as you can find a match that implies a meaning, well, then you've actually found nothing. Okay. And analyzing things in a narrative basis, in a real world basis, and a moral basis is eminently more sensible. In fact, it's the only valuable thing. The playing the match is not valuable at all. All right. And, sooner or later, it's going to be one of these things. And people are like, well, why are you being mean to the people playing match and decoding? I'm not being mean. I'm saying that is a clear waste of time. Do we want to spend all our life on all the wastes of time that exist within the political oeuvre of America? I don't want to do that. That's why I don't spend time chasing every rabbit hole that they form in some ridiculous info op story that people pay attention to for a day or 2 days. They waste all their time on it for 3 days and then never think about that issue ever again because it wasn't important to begin with. It had no potential to be important in the future. All right. It was never important at any time. Why would we spend our days chasing down a rabbit hole on a story like that? And that would only be because we are addicted to the soap opera and we can't get ourselves out of it. And we've lost our ability to discern what parts of the soap opera have relevance in our life and which don't. In fact, which parts aren't even of the soap opera, which parts suggest a connection to the real world and to our real lives. All right. If we are still at the first level people had achieved in late 2017, and it's mid 2025, something's gone wrong. All right. Are we going to play match forever? And if not, then when does the matching end? Oh, it ends when the plan concludes and we've won again. Okay. Well, what does that mean? Republicans are back in charge and we've taken down the deep state. Well, there's a lot more to do than that. At some point, we're going to have to move past this into just real life as we understand it in this new reality, which is the only reality we've ever known, minus the abstraction layer of that false reality over it. Okay. So I still have the same opinions on the Q-op that I had when I wrote a story about reality over 3 years ago, which is, it's a very important info op. I don't know who released that info op. Trump signals to that info op. I'm convinced by those proofs. It doesn't suggest the meaning of the match, except that Trump is publicly recognizing the info op. Could he do that with an enemy info op? Yes. And I've already cited multiple examples of him potentially doing that in today's episode. Okay. So it's entirely possible that he can be giving nods and hat tips to that op just to make people think about that op and the information it brings in a different way that is committed to Donald Trump rather than subversive of Donald Trump. All right. But we can't recognize that if all we care about is the matches. And so, the info op is a good info op or bad info op in its initial intent. It is what we make of it after that that determines what it is in reality. All right. If we take it as the catalyst for us to find out more about the deep, dark truths that have been hidden from us about how our society actually operates, so that we might one day be able to affect it in an efficient and productive way so that we can have a change. Well, now we have a goal and a use, which I believe presents the Q-op in the best possible light. And that is still a matter of how we use it. All right. So, I know there's some disagreement about that stuff, but I can't imagine there's going to be another direction. Sooner or later, the cycle must end unless it's psyops for all time. Okay. If it's just one group of Freemasons battling another group of Freemasons, all of us being hoodwinked in the meantime, and them fighting for which sect of Freemasonry gets to control us, well, then that is our condition. And to be outside that, we need to break out of that controlled opposition dynamic. And as I suggested the other day, I think what's outside of that is God. Okay. So that is then where we turn, which is why the Freemasons have their own weird thing about God, right? They all believe, commit to believing in a higher power. Okay. Is that God? Is it the Christian God? No, it's not. All right, then. What's your higher power? Oh, it's something that gives you worldly benefits. Okay, so that's the opposite of God. Got it, guys. Oh, man. Okay. Let us continue. Bay Theater Dave says, you're watching a scripted movie, Q. They never talk about what the scare quotes infer. And the scare quotes are around scripted. And I agree with you. I mean, what does it mean that all of it is just a show? Okay. If you're going to take that route, I'm not suggesting everyone be convinced of that viewpoint. On some level, we can see that that is true in kind of the simulacra and simulation matrix understanding of all of that. Okay. At some point, you understand that much of reality as you know it has been constructed on an abstract layer. Okay. Or a layer of abstraction. And so that makes up a scripted reality in some sense. And that is one problem to deal with. And so we know that that's a real thing that is operative in the world. And you can argue about the extent of it at least. But if all of this is scripted and this is all an info op and all a narrative rollout to get the country to shift opinions, well, then it still matters which direction they go, which is why we've had all these cleavings, these siftings that I have talked about even just in this episode. Democrats initially. Okay. We know that's not right. The neocons and the Republican establishment, we have different paths to knowing that those aren't right. And then the final alignment, this tech bro thing, we have a path to knowing that that's not right. And there may be other tiny subgroups without a lot of power that need to be cleaved at a later stage past tech. But I don't know which ones those would be immediately, although it could be. I mean, the Israel thing kind of already does it. The neocon thing already kind of does it. But it could be some of the evangelical thing and the fact that many of them have not awakened yet. And I mean mainstream evangelical churchgoers, mainstream American Jewish Christianity Judeo-Christianity, as they call it, they call it that for a reason, in the United States. It is its own refutation and inversion of Christianity, pitched from power, heavily incentivized, which is why all of them are so rich, and preaching a prosperity gospel to focus their own congregations on the worldly. Okay. It's not hard to see how these things got here. What's hard is distinguishing the good twin and evil twin aspect, because the inversion is meant to look exactly the same and be indistinguishable from the genuine article. And so we have to revert. All right. And at some point, it's got to end, or it's just stories forever. Okay. Yeah. Bay Theater Dave says again, if it was actually scripted as they claim, there would be no quotes around scripted. Yeah, that's right. Okay. I guess we're going to be forced by the clock to miss out on so much of this. It was a funny past few days, particularly with the Trump tariffs and the Bolsonaro and Lula thing. He called out Lula da Silva, Brazil's Joe Biden, for election fraud and violations of free speech. Lula is a fake president down there. He is now going to be apparently publicly dismantled by Donald Trump over time. And couldn't happen to a better guy. Now, maybe Lula is just a stand-in and a prop and an actor and a clone or whatever you want to say about Joe Biden. Okay. I get it. The parallel is entirely possible. I'm not certain that it matters here. I think that we can encompass and kind of get a grip on all the aspects of that reality, assuming that to be true, without engaging the topic or coming to a conclusion on it. And so then we don't need to commit ourselves to any viewpoint on whether or not Joe Biden is a clone or a double or a video creation that is merely transmitted to us, or that he's the real Joe Biden with a lot of facial surgery, a lot of head surgery generally. All right. Well, I blew it. That old Al Pacino movie. I can't remember which one it is. It might be Serpico, but I'm not sure. I'll have to find that clip and put it in the soundboard at some point. But for now, let's talk about the makeup play. This story was released, many people believe, as the makeup story for the disappointment after the Jeffrey Epstein memo. Now, I don't know that to be the case, okay? I have no doubt that, or I have very little doubt. I have doubt in everything. I have very little doubt that John Brennan and James Comey are bad guys, but you never know. So we leave open the possibility that we could have been hoodwinked by the uniparty right on these issues, same as we've been hoodwinked by the uniparty left on other issues, or they've attempted to, and that Donald Trump just went with one side of the hoodwinking rather than the other. And therefore, we believe that the uniparty right, Fox News in this case, is telling us the truth about what's going on here and that it's all for our benefit, okay? We should be skeptical about those things. So Fox News from Tuesday. FBI launches criminal investigations of John Brennan, James Comey, DOJ sources, according to DOJ sources. Now, where is this coming from? Former CIA Director John Brennan and former FBI Director James Comey are under criminal investigation for potential wrongdoing related to the Trump-Russia probe, including allegedly making false statements to Congress, the Justice Department sources told Fox News Digital. CIA Director, this is the current one, John Ratcliffe, referred evidence of wrongdoing by Brennan to FBI Director Kash Patel for potential prosecution. Okay. Now, there's been some doubt about Ratcliffe when it comes to, I think, the Israel-Iran stuff, the information about the nukes and all the rest of it. But here we have Ratcliffe, the CIA director, with some access internally to what the CIA would have been doing before, at least theoretically. It's entirely possible that the evil twin element within the CIA tried to cover their tracks as much as possible before Ratcliffe got in there. So who knows what access he has to information that suggests the wrongdoing of John Brennan while he was at the CIA. Don't know. We're going to have to see in the future. The sources said that the referral was received and told Fox News Digital that a criminal investigation into Brennan was opened and is underway. DOJ sources declined to provide further details. It is unclear at this point if the investigation spans beyond his alleged false statements to Congress. As for Comey, DOJ sources told Fox News Digital that an investigation into the former director is underway, but could not share details of what specifically is being probed. And so we don't know. They're being gone after for their activity in the Trump-Russia hoax. Could John Brennan be a secret white hat hoodwinking everybody behind the scenes as part of an anti-regime effort? Now that seems like an impossible ask to believe that at this point, probably for all of us, and I totally get why. John Brennan is said to be a communist and has had associations with the Communist Party of America. Okay. He's also an Obama guy and a Muslim. That's what we're told. That's the John Brennan truther bio profile. All of those things would suggest that John Brennan is a servant of that regime. And I have no reason to doubt that. Okay. We know that there were contemporaneous records created, Brennan's own notes, about a July 2017 meeting where the Obama administration and Joe Biden were fully informed about Hillary Clinton's involvement in the Russian collusion hoax. And the Obama administration did not alert the American public to the existence of that plot to subvert and undermine the Trump campaign and then the transition process and then the first Trump administration. They spied on his campaign, okay? And then they kept spying on the executive office of the president. So let's see how the regime has reacted to good old John Brennan. Here is Brennan himself.
Testified in front of many, many congressional committees in the House and the Senate over the years. And I continue to explain exactly what we did during this process, why we tried to make sure we stayed true to our intelligence responsibilities and that we were not going to do anything at all to try to interfere in that election. And again, it was a challenging time, but also one I think that the people who actually worked this, both in terms of trying to collect intelligence prior to the election and then the ones who put together the intelligence community assessment, they really, I think, showed the best of what the intelligence community and what CIA is made of. So again, I am clueless about what it is exactly that they may be investigating me for.
Yeah, I mean, the guy is just as innocent as can be. He is a hardcore American patriot. He cannot believe that they would ever be doing this. He's totally clueless about it. But to be honest, he seems fairly calm. Let us continue. This is also John Brennan.
Keep thinking, okay, this is the authoritarian playbook. We've seen this play out so many times, and unfortunately, I think we're seeing it play out. And a number of academics and writers have pointed out, and Carl Schmitt, who was a German jurist, political philosopher, and writer in the 1930s, his thesis, which Nazi Germany basically took up, was don't worry about doing something that is ethical or principled or good or right. do whatever you can to win, vanquish your adversaries, vanquish your enemies. And unfortunately, we have seen that happening overseas. We've seen it in Viktor Orban in Hungary. We've seen it with Vladimir Putin. We see it in China, other places. We see it also in terms of, some of the foreign policies that are being implemented, including, in the Middle East right now. So I really am very worried that what we're seeing now in this chapter of American history is a sad deterioration of, I think, the respect for the rule of law and for our system of government. And if a president of the United States is willing to weaponize intelligence and justice and, law enforcement investigators, and the people who head up these departments and agencies are willing to bow to it, we really are in deep, deep trouble, which was why I think so many people are worried about the direction this country is taking.
So the authoritarian playbook, Donald Trump is using the authoritarian playbook to go after his political enemies using all the tools of government. And it's exactly like what happened in Nazi Germany. So saith John Brennan. Okay. The guy who actually supports the same global regime is saying that Donald Trump is the Nazi. And again, the authoritarian playbook. What is their playbook? Okay. And again, we got to talk about who they call authoritarian. He's citing Viktor Orban and Vladimir Putin. Do you prefer Viktor Orban and Vladimir Putin or Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, Ursula von der Leyen, Kamala, and Peter Thiel? I'll take Orban and Putin, please. Okay. And so the authoritarian playbook, all of this is ridiculous. But what we're talking about here is a total inversion within the false reality. They have the true identity. They combine with another group. They push that identity onto the other group. And then they go the opposite direction, saying that, they had some common interests with that other group, but on the really important stuff, they were actually never aligned. So you see, that group hates people like us. They were just using us. We weren't using them. We didn't transfer our identity onto them. They were using us, and we finally understood what they morally represented, and so we left. That's the World War II story he's referring to. Of course, it just happened in the opposite direction. Here is another Russia hoaxer, Andrew Weissman.
Also notable, if you're thinking about sort of what's going on, there is normally a 5-year statute of limitations to bring a criminal case. My first reaction to this was, excuse me? I mean, not only is there nothing I know that would suggest there should be a criminal investigation, but of course, as you noted, we don't obviously know everything that would be within the department. So giving them the benefit of the doubt, I don't think they deserve it. But let's say we do that. It's still totally unclear how they're going to have a criminal investigation if what they're looking at is something that happened in 2016. That is not something within a 5-year statute of limitations. I don't do math publicly, but even I can do that math.
Statute of limitations. An abstraction within an abstraction. A law that exists only in their system. And Andrew Weissman is suggesting that maybe that should trump treason. Sorry, Andrew Weissman. I think Polymath pointed this out yesterday in the Telegram chat, but the statute of limitations on treason is meaningless. There is no statute of limitations for treason. And in the real world, once the legalistic abstraction is removed, statute of limitations. You don't get to call Ollie oxen free on treason. It's crazy. Polymathanon also says in the chat right now, I find it odd that Comey and Brennan are called out, but not James Clapper. And I am right on board with you on that one. And I guess you got Michael Hayden in that group as well, if memory serves. So, yeah, I think that you're exactly right. I guess we're going to see. And, again, InfoOp, always got to explore the possibility of an InfoOp and what that InfoOp could be designed to do and who it's being run by. Just got to walk through every possible perspective on that. Anytime an issue comes up, that's where we are. I wish it wasn't like that, but imagine a scenario in the real world where you could make important decisions without considering all the possible outcomes, right? You would end up making an extraordinary number of bad decisions. And then eventually it would cause a bad life unless you were so safe, so secure, so privileged. If all the corners were covered so you never bumped your widow head, then maybe you could make wrong decisions all the way through your life and not have to pay a price for it. Otherwise, you would pay a price for it. Therefore, it makes sense to consider all the possible options. Now, our political alignment, we just think that these are, soap opera episodes that we're talking about during the day. We're arguing with our liberal friends or whatever it is. And so it doesn't really matter. But if we're trying to figure out these issues for real, then it does matter. And we actually do have to engage the same decision-making process before determining what's the right way. What is our right stance in relation to this given issue? Let us go on to Mark Elias, one of the all-time worsts. But here he is in pure panic. And this one's like 3 minutes long. The other one's 2.5. So a little bit on the long side, but I think worth it.
Mark Elias, where are we?
And by the way, worth noting that it's always Nicole Wallace or some other MSNBC television host, because MSNBC is the home of many of these places. And CNN is another one of those homes. But these are lawyers arguing as defense attorneys for the criminals in the court of public opinion. All right. This is not a courtroom drama, although that's exactly what it is. The argument is being made to us to generate our collective belief on behalf of these criminals on MSNBC.
After crossing into this, feels like new territory.
Yeah, look, we're in a place in which we are watching Donald Trump weaponize the Department of Justice against his political enemies. This is not the first, by the way. He has indicted a congresswoman from New Jersey. He actually arrested the mayor of Newark, although then those charges got dropped. They threw to the ground a U.S. Senator, Alex Padilla in California, for trying to ask a question. They manhandled the New York City comptroller, Brad Lander, for trying to walk a migrant out of a courtroom. So we have watched this step after step. And by the way, I could keep.
For trying to walk a migrant out of a courtroom? What is he talking about? Any person who is not totally wrapped around the axle and Trump deranged to the point of never recovering, anyone besides those people would think pretty early on here, didn't they indict Donald Trump? Weren't they trying to put him in prison for like 700 years? And now, sure, all those indictments were fake and none of that was ever going to happen. But still, everybody took on that story as though it's real. It interacts with their minds as though it's real. And even in a narrative sense, not mattering if it's real or not, it would still refute all of these claims at first glance from virtually everybody.
Going on and on. I mean, you have Donald Trump going to the Department of Justice and calling me a communist and other things. The executive orders targeting me and other lawyers. The executive orders targeting law firms that we were affiliated with. The executive directives for.
Worth remembering that Mark Elias was at Perkins Coie during the Trump-Russia collusion incident. Hillary Clinton was contracted with them. The campaign was.
Investigations of Chris Krebs, right? You have covered this so exemplary, Nicole. You have helped catalog this. But we are quickly going to a place in which Donald Trump is doing this and it is being normalized. And so I wrote something for Democracy Docket 5-6 months ago that you and I talked about at the time, which is we predicted, you and I and others, that we were going to get to this moment. And the question is,
Okay, so they're going to get to this moment. I'm going to rewind that for just because I want to go back to something a few seconds earlier. The normalization. They're attempting to normalize this. Okay. Again, the fake and illegitimate Biden administration, fake and illegitimate as though it may be, already normalized that. Okay. And what does it mean to normalize something? Well, that means that the public consciousness shifts relative to the thing they used to get really upset about. And now they don't get upset about it anymore because it's been normalized. Now it is the normal thing. So therefore not worth getting upset about. He is literally talking about losing a narrative battle.
Docket 5-6 months ago that you and I talked about at the time, which is we predicted, you and I and others, that we were going to get to this moment. And the question is, what do we do? And the question of what we do is multifaceted. The first question is, what do we do? Do we retreat and hide in the corner? So I'm on TV today, not hiding in the corner. I'm not retreating. I'm saying I'm going to stand up and fight, and Donald Trump won't intimidate me by going back to this 2016 stuff. And that's one thing. But the other thing we've talked about is, what do large institutions do? You know, what do civil society groups do? What does the media do? And I am imploring, like, honestly, I'm just imploring the media, do not report this as a legitimate investigation. Do not report this as they're opening a investigation into John Brennan. We will see where it goes.
He sounds like me 3 years ago or 2 years ago talking about the Trump indictments. Don't report this as though it's serious and real. And I never did, thank goodness. And I think that paid off in spades. People got very upset about that, including people who were, you know, relatively involved with us, let's say, in the quote unquote truth movement. All right. They all wanted to take the Trump indictments very, very seriously, despite them being fake. Donald Trump, you might remember there was a clip from one of our GART events. I think it was in Dallas, although it may have been in Irvine or something. But I talked about how Trump was so indicted. He was going to college football games, stopping by fraternity houses, flipping burgers, throwing footballs with the frat guys, but so indicted, flying around on his like private super plane guarded by the military, but also so indicted and about to go to jail. And they said, I wasn't serious. Oh, that guy's not serious. You know who's not serious? Y'all, okay? You think the shit is real. That takes you out of the realm of the serious, right? You got to get the real and fake thing correct first. And I'm not saying I nail it every single time, okay? We're all going to get hoodwinked sometimes. The thing's a lot more complicated. Every time I think I am approaching the greatest level of its complication, there are more levels, okay? The Matrix is a very complicated place, all right? But the most important thing, the most fundamental thing is knowing which is the Matrix and which is not the Matrix. If you're thinking about the Matrix movies, right? Which part of it is Neo wearing like super futuristic, awesome guy clothes. And then the rest of it, some like retro futuristic, we're sort of poor now, but have these awesome like earth tone clothes on character, right? There's two distinct visual worlds. So you're like, oh, that's in the Matrix and that's not in the Matrix. Well, when you're in the Matrix and you don't know what the other part of the world looks like, your number one priority is to figure out which one's real, which one is the abstraction. So if you're getting that wrong, you can't enter the realm of the serious into the conversations. I mean, we can have an abstract conversation about what it would mean that these attorneys who themselves seem to have a really sketchy past are coming up with novel legal ideas presented to them by the Brookings Institute. And we're all going to think that Trump's going to jail on that. We can talk about the abstract level of that and whether or not that makes sense. And then I will be perfectly happy to engage with the indictments themselves for the purpose of proving that they are the same as the white paper from the Brookings Institution and color revolutionist Norm Eisen. We can talk about that. But you want me to talk about who the bad guys are? Oh, those are black hats running an anti-Trump op. And that's why this part of the indictment is good. Sure, buddy. Sure it is. Been right the whole time, I'm sure. All righty then. Okay. Let's get done with Elias and then we will wrap it up for the week.
Report this as the misuse, the abuse, the authoritarian takeover of the Department of Justice. That should be the headline. The headline should be, in a misuse and abuse of the power of the executive branch, Donald Trump has asked his Department of Justice to open a bogus investigation into John Brennan.
It is Donald Trump's sworn constitutional oath and duty to direct the Department of Justice to pursue and prosecute every single federal crime. It's not a choice. It doesn't correspond to our quote unquote norms, which, by the way, aren't norms. That's a media concoction. All right. There's no norms that suggest the president can't direct his administration to enforce the law. That's the point of the executive branch. Okay. And then you can also go over to the aspect where Joe Biden just did all those things and everybody saw it. And everyone watching MSNBC argued that he was right in doing it. Just saying.
And if you don't do that, then the media is going to wind up in the same position the law firms wound in, same position that CBS is wound up in, the same position that many individual civil servants have wound up in, that nobody is going to speak out when they are next targeted. So it is important that we all stand up for each other. We all stand up for John Brennan. We all stand up for the misuse of government power, whether it's going after a civil servant or it's going after a former director of the CIA, or whether it's going after a media organization or it's going after a law firm. But my fear is that we are not doing that. Everyone is sort of playing tightly in their lane because they don't want to be next in line.
Well, it's such a good point, and I won't.
Everyone is just laying back. They're not going to come out because they're worried that if they do, they're going to be targeted next by this authoritarian regime that is the first regime ever, the first administration ever to use the DOJ, to weaponize the DOJ and use it against their political opponents. Except all of us just witnessed that. If we hadn't witnessed that, would Trump be able to do all this, avoiding the Hitler playbook? I would suggest to you the answer is no. Okay. So that means we had to see that period for this purpose. And why did we have to see that period for this purpose? Because we were not able to get there ourselves collectively so that society would remain stable if we did the thing that must be done. That is entirely our responsibility to move forward. Okay. It's not going to get done because the TV has told us, oh, now these criminals have been punished. Got to get there ourselves. Right. And by the way, getting there yourself is the only way that it is valuable and doesn't stand a chance to destroy your life. All right. That's why we have to be honest with ourselves and open to changing with the humility that we know we're getting a lot of things wrong, no matter how right we think we are. And that includes me, by the way. Okay. I got things wrong my entire life. All right. And I still get things wrong. We all get things wrong. All right. But we have to step back far enough to understand that it is still happening now, question all of our priors and be willing to reassess and move to that new place so that we can speed ahead. And by the way, when I say speed ahead, I mean, we're still behind real time. We're trying to catch up to real time. So no matter how ahead we think we are, we're still behind, right? That's just the reality of the world. We're not going to know as much, and people of greater positions of access and power, we're not going to know as much as an amalgamation of all the information sources like an AI would. And then, of course, ultimately, we're not going to know as much as God. We are not omniscient, okay? We have very limited knowledge that we know even in the worldly human realm is levels below where the best knowledge is. And that is unavoidable. So we are always going to be behind the timeline, but we are speeding ahead to catch up, not to conquer our peers, although doing better in the real world relative to the people who didn't move forward is an inevitability. It's not the reason you do that, okay? You do it because it's right, because it represents the truth, because it is wise for yourself, your family, your community. The competition, the advantage in the competition, to the extent a competition exists, is a byproduct and not the point. If it becomes the point, well, then you've missed something critical. One more Elias clip, and then we will get into the wrap-up portion.
Caution, care, and integrity. Mark Elias.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. And look, if you want to know why so many Democrats for so long have gotten so angry about all of this, it's because in 2016, the Russian Federation hacked into the Democratic National Committee server. It is because Hillary Clinton was vilified by Russia. It is because Donald Trump took to a stage and asked for Russia to do his bidding. And then what happened after that is Donald Trump became president, and he appointed John Durham. He appointed Bill Barr, who chose John Durham to facilitate a legitimization that was Donald Trump's fever dream, that somehow Russia did not intervene in the 2016 election to help him. And John Durham then got special counsel protection on the way out as the Trump administration came to an end. On the way out the door, he got special counsel protection, and he brought 3 cases, Nicole. One of them was the low-level plea that you mentioned by a low-level person. The other 2 were acquittals. John Durham brought 2 nonsense cases that juries threw out of court. Then he wrote a fantastical report.
Still got the evidence on the record, though. And that might be what Mark Elias is most upset about. Rico Grande is coming.
To try to make something, anything, out of a bunch of nothing. Because the fact is, it was Hillary Clinton and the Democrats who had been the victims, not Donald Trump. And so Donald Trump is now back in office. And the same people who are peddling the same nonsense, who are once again trying to make Donald Trump the victim of something that was actually Donald Trump encouraging the Russians from the stage to release hacked emails, are now once again leaking and suggesting and otherwise saying maybe now it's not this person, it's now John Brennan, when the fact remains the Russian Federation wanted Donald Trump to win in 2016. Donald Trump gleefully took advantage of that fact, and ever since has been peddling this misinformation, these lies, and having his minions open this investigation and that investigation, one after another, that ultimately either conclude that what he is saying is not true, or that end, as John Durham's did, in failure and efforts to prove cases that never existed.
Well, all I can say to Mark Elias is good luck with that, Commie. I don't think it's going to work out very well for you. He did not make the case there. All of that is dependent on the American public still believing that Donald Trump colluded with Russia to steal the 2016 election, as though he wouldn't have won otherwise. He's won 3 elections. He's gotten more popular for 10 straight years, while every system of power in the world has attacked him and attacked his supporters and incentivized everything in a direction that opposes Donald Trump and Donald Trump's supporters. So I don't think that Mark Elias is doing well, and I don't imagine that he will be doing well, unless, of course, he's a secret white hat. And then what can we do about any of it? Now, as I said, I'm not going to get to some of these other issues. Before we finish, I want to just check on this really quickly. I also do want to say, to point out this is another one of the good cop, bad cop scenarios I had set up. In the same week, we get a story about the Pentagon no longer sending any more weapons to Ukraine, and then Trump coming back the other way and saying, no, wait, we are going to send more weapons to Ukraine. Now, I talked with Gordon about this a little bit this morning, and there's a good twin, evil twin issue in Ukraine, especially in the eastern portion of Ukraine, where the quote unquote war has been fought. There was an ethnic civil war, I should say, in Ukraine that started a decade ago. That entire portion, the regime proxy state was waging war against the Ukrainian people of the eastern portion of Ukraine. All those regions have been nothing but Russia for years. Okay. So the Ukraine war is happening in Russia. It just is. And there are Ukrainians there who would be on the anti-regime side. So are they being armed by the Trump administration? It's entirely possible. He talks about sending them Patriot missiles, I think, back during the first term. Okay. So who's he? Which Ukrainians? He's arming Ukraine. Which Ukrainians? Right? That is a question that absolutely must be asked. But either way, the public's getting both sides of that conversation, which makes it so that one side can finally win. That no one in the public, widespread, wants Ukraine to be supported by America. Doesn't matter, good twin, evil twin at that point. Russia is not a threat. We have no business involving ourselves in that war. We don't want our resources being spent on that war, our finances going to that war, our military industrial complex facilitating that war. We don't want any of it. All right? None of the justifications matter. The conversation has been hashed out in public. The American public has reached a position in the collective consciousness, and this is how we will go forward. And I think that we're going to continue seeing that sort of good cop, bad cop on all of these issues. He does it with trade. He does it again and again and again. Two more things. So I pulled up, I dropped this poll on Truth Social and on Telegram yesterday, and I pulled up the Truth Social version. I really should have pulled up the Telegram version because it had so many more votes. Let me see if I can grab this. Yes, perfect. So I asked initially, are we and have we been under military government? 1,111 votes. 87% said yes, we are now or have been under military government. 87% of people already believe we're under military government. And by the way, if devolution is correct, it would suggest that there is a military government element to all of that scenario, which is something John and I have discussed at some length over the last couple of years here and there. I followed that poll up with another and said, if yes, you believe we've been under military government, for how long have we been under military government? I said the options were since November 2024, since December/January of 2020. What I should have said is December of 2020, January of 2021, since April Fool's Day of 2020, which was the chart that Donald Trump always points to, the escalator ride of 2015, since 9/11, since JFK, since the Civil War, or even longer. And the number one response was the devolution period, which I guess can be expected based on the crowd, followed by since the 2015 escalator ride. So 19% of 1,139 votes said the escalator ride. Trump coming down the escalator was the signal of military government being in place, which would then mean that all the elections since then have been a factor of that military government and the op as it's being rolled out and the strategy as it's being rolled out long term. That's a significant event. I would say that's definitely one of the possible answers. Although I would think it happened before then. The next in order was 15% saying April Fool's Day. So right early during that very deadly pandemic period. And then it goes down from there. JFK got 9%. The Civil War got 6%. That was the last option on the Truth Social poll. And then on Telegram, I suggested even longer. I voted for even longer, but I would also accept the Civil War answer. I think we've probably been under some form of military government for at least that long. Although JFK, a lot of people think that that's a starting point where the military knew that they had to step in because the global regime had assassinated the president. And so I could get on board with that theory as well. And then one more quick subject before we go that is a bit on the same track. This is Donald Trump on Truth Social today. Well, there's Charlie Kirk in some weird post from an attention farmer on Truth Social. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth was great on Fox News this morning, talking about modern weapons and warfare. Thank you also to Brett Velikovich, who really knows his stuff. We are really on our way, MAGA. And Velikovich is, I guess, someone who is one of the leading thinkers on drone warfare and technology. So that's an interesting hat tip to Velikovich as well. But he called Secretary Pete Hegseth the Secretary of War, not the Secretary of Defense. He also referred to Hegseth as the Secretary of War when he was at the NATO conference. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. Trump seems to be pressing this Secretary of War bit. Why is he doing that? What does it mean that he's doing that? And so I asked the machine, here is ChatGPT, was anything formal ever done to change the Secretary and Department of War into the Secretary and Department of Defense? And said, yes, of course. The change was formal and deliberate. When did it happen? Well, with the passage of the National Security Act of 1947. And then the amendments to that act in 1949. And the Act of 1947 created the National Military Establishment, which combined the Department of War and the Department of the Navy under a new Secretary of Defense. And initially, those positions then, I suppose, would have just reported directly to the president. Now they have a Secretary of Defense, another layer of separation and a centralization at the same time. They created the Department of the Air Force as a separate branch, and Trump has mentioned the creation of the Air Force consistently over many years when talking about the creation of the Space Force. It created the National Security Council and the Central Intelligence Agency. All of these things under that same act, returning from Secretary of Defense to Secretary of War, would suggest the reversal and reversion of one of these elements. Okay? Is it going to be all of the elements? That would be the next question, because we know already that it's one. The Department of War was renamed the Department of the Army. The NME was NME. Isn't that amazing? National Military Establishment, NME, is headed by the Secretary of Defense. In the amendments in 1949, because the NME proved unwieldy, Congress amended the law. They renamed the National Military Establishment the Department of Defense, the DOD. So it's not the enemy anymore. Now it's the organization that defends you. It subordinated the secretaries of the Army, Navy, and Air Force directly under the Secretary of Defense, removing their cabinet status. strengthened central authority, giving the Secretary of Defense more power over budget and planning. How about that? And I asked the machine whether it was possible that Trump was undoing the Act of 1947 and the Act of 1949, which are the post-World War II, let's set up the CIA, let's set up Israel, let's set up the United Nations, period. Is he undoing all those things? Well, yeah, the macro pattern suggests he's undoing all of those things, and that those things have to be undone to conform to the macro pattern. So are we seeing Trump do them? Did he do them here? And is that level being removed? I would suggest that it is. And all of these things are going to decentralize. He'll decentralize the military along these lines, remove that cabinet level, because all that exists on a non-constitutional layer. And I asked the machine, can he do this? Is he doing this? And they're like, well, he can't unless he gets Congress to pass legislation. Well, no, that's not the only way, actually. Because if those are unconstitutional forms that cannot be defended in a Supreme Court setting and in the court of public opinion, which is more important than the Supreme Court, well, then the president can just override and go right around those things. And I would suggest that that is going to be the strategy. No matter what narrative layers need to get piled on, that is going to be the strategy. And we're going to see those actions. That'll all be on the reality prime level. And then we'll be told a story about it. And the story will be annoying. And the only reason for the story will be because people engaged with the reality prime level are unwilling to suggest that the story is a confection itself, because that would mean that Trump is lying to them. And beyond anything else, they have to trust Trump. They have to trust Q. They can't question any of these things. They can't move ahead. Otherwise, they might stop the plan, even though nothing can stop what's coming. Isn't that a strange dynamic? What are these people doing? Sooner or later, we're going to have to ask that question. Just saying. The cleavage and the sifting never stop. Okay, everybody, thank you very much for tuning in to the subscriber stream. I will be replaying this on Sunday afternoon in case you want to watch it again and participate in the conversation in the chat over there on Rumble. Okay, so it's going to go out on Rumble. It's going to go out on YouTube and Getter and Telegram, etc. All right. Thank you all very much for your support. As I say always on Substack, I could not do this without you. Thank you very much. You know, people used to use the Q&A feature of the subscriber stream. You're still totally welcome to do that. I mean, I know that it's kind of been replaced with the chat interaction and all good, but just saying. And with that, I will be back on Tuesday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What?
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.